Hey guys, tonight we're going straight into one of the weirdest bedtime routines in history, Victorian England. You arrive at a house that looks lovely on the outside. Ivy covers the brick, lace curtains hang in the windows. You give a quiet little knock before the maid lets you in. But once you're shown up the stairs and ushered to your room, things start to feel different. The hallway is narrow and the floorboards creak under your feet. The wallpaper, with its faded roses and curling edges, smells of damp soot and something faintly like medicine. Your host points to a door and assures you'll find everything prepared for the night. Then she vanishes like a ghost. You push the door open, it's freezing. There's a small iron bed in the centre of the room, completely covered in thick layers. On the nightstand is a jug and bowl for washing, a stub of candle in a brass holder, and oddly, a blackened metal pan shaped like a pizza peel. You tap it. It's warm. That, the maid says from behind you, is the bed warmer. Coal. Don't touch the metal. It'll blister you. The bed itself is piled high with a mattress so soft you could lose a cat in it, but you're more distracted by the peculiar setup at the foot. A stoneware pot with a wooden lid. Oh no, that's not a teapot. It's a chamber pot, your nighttime bathroom solution. There's no plumbing upstairs, and stepping outside isn't an option in the cold, especially for ladies. Before you even get into bed, you're already sweating from hauling on the layers. A wool nightshirt, knitted socks, a thick robe. The fireplace in the corner has burned down to embers, leaving a sweet and acrid smell. Coal and smoke mixed with something faintly metallic. And you haven't even attempted to lie down yet. The mattress groans as you sit. It's stuffed with feathers, maybe straw underneath, and dips dramatically in the centre, a little like being swallowed by a warm, itchy donut. Suddenly, you hear a rustling in the walls. Mice, probably. The maid left out a saucer of lard under the bed to keep them from chewing the quilt, she said, casually comforting you. You lie back and stare up. The ceiling's low. The candle flickers oddly. The chill creeps under the covers. Despite all the effort, you wiggle your toes against the warmth left by the coal pan, now cooling fast. Your breath fogs the air in tiny puffs. If this was supposed to be cosy, you're not quite there yet. All right, before you get too cosy, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. But only if your heart says yes. And hey, drop a comment with your location and the time where you are. We've got listeners from Michigan to Malaysia. Dim the lights, get that fan going for some background vibes, and let's chill into tonight's little adventure. You pull the bedclothes tight around you and wonder what people back then actually thought made a perfect night's sleep, because so far it feels like a cross between camping and minor survival training. Then comes a knocking, not on your door, but on the window. A loose shutter, maybe. Or is it something else? You sit up, pulse skipping slightly. You suddenly remember what the host muttered earlier as she climbed the stairs. Don't mind the knocking, the night has its own rhythm here. And that, you realise, might be the understatement of the century. You try to ignore the knocking. It stops, thankfully. But then comes a creaking from the rafters. It could be the wind, could be the house settling, or it could be something older, something that's lived in the walls longer than the wallpaper. You remind yourself that this is just a guest room in a respectable Victorian home. It's not haunted, probably. With the candle guttering beside you, you make a final inspection of your surroundings. There's no lock on the door, just an old-fashioned latch. The window panes are warped from decades of cold and condensation, distorting the moonlight into strange patterns across the floorboards. You start to understand why Victorians took nighttime so seriously, why everything in this room, from the heavy drapes to the brick in your bed, is about survival. Not just survival from the cold, but from the unknown. You inch your feet toward the footboard and find the warmth has faded already. The hot coal pan that the maid used to heat your sheets has done its job for about 20 minutes now. The mattress feels clammy, and the sheets hold the memory of the brick's heat, but none of the comfort. You try flipping the pillow, hoping for a cool side, only to find that both sides are cold. Not cool, cold. And then there's the chamber pot. You had tried to ignore it before, pretend it wasn't there. But now, with your feet freezing and your mind racing, you can't stop glancing at it. It's just sitting there in the gloom, an unassuming vessel of dignity lost. What happens if you do need to use it? How do you even aim in the dark? Does someone come collect it in the morning? You sincerely hope it's not your job to carry it downstairs. You roll over and pull the covers higher. They're made of wool and something scratchier. Horsehair, maybe. Victorians loved their layers. Even poor families would pile on quilts, shawls, coats, and even carpets over the bed to trap body heat. But all that weight doesn't make it warmer, just heavier. You're trapped in a cocoon of mildly itchy suffocation, trying not to move, because every time you do, cold air snakes in from the gaps, and still you hear the distant ticking of the hallway clock, each second, louder than the last. You wonder how children manage to sleep like this. Then you remember they probably didn't. Victorian children often shared beds, sometimes 4 or 5 at a time, and not just siblings. Cousins, servants, even boarders could end up sleeping in shifts, feet to head, strangers breathing into each other's scalps. It hits you. This was luxury. A single bed, even with mice and chamber pots and cold corners, that was a blessing. You shift again and the bed frame lets out a high-pitched creak that sounds far too human. The feather mattress rustles like dry leaves. Somewhere under you, the brick from the warming pan has rolled slightly out of place. It presses against your ankle, now no longer hot, but somehow still radiating an eerie discomfort, like it remembers being on fire and resents the cooling. You close your eyes. You try to think of warm things. You think of toast, which is ironic because many a Victorian bedroom smelled exactly like toast, and not in a good way. That burnt, lingering odour wasn't from breakfast. It was from the coal soot drifting up through vents, or from the paraffin used in the warmer, or from a hasty attempt to start the fire with a bit too much kindling and not enough patience. The room settles. You're finally almost warm. Almost. But something in you knows this night is only just beginning. You wake up to the gentle scratch of wool against your cheek and the unmistakable weight of something ridiculous on your head. You forgot about the nightcap. At first you think you're wearing a stray sock, but no. The sagging, ruffled fabric drooping down the side of your face is very intentional. A long conical thing with a tassel at the end, tied beneath your chin in a delicate bow. If you weren't half asleep and mildly chilled, you'd laugh out loud. But here, in the quiet gloom of the room, it's just another part of the nightly ritual. Victorians adored their nightcaps, both the fabric kind and, confusingly, the liquid kind. Brandy before bed. But we're not talking about that tonight. This one is purely textile. It itches slightly, and it doesn't stay put. Every time you roll over, it shifts, threatens to cover your eyes, or slip down the back of your neck like a limp curtain. Still, there was a logic behind it. In the days before central heating, a large portion of your body's heat escaped through your head, so Victorians, especially those in drafty houses with no insulation, wrapped their heads tightly for bed. A sleeping bonnet wasn't just cosy, it was to their minds medically sensible. You run your fingers along the seams, it's hand-stitched, likely from cotton or linen with a bit of embroidery at the edge. Not decorative, functional. Everything in this room is here for a reason, even if that reason feels absurd now. Across the room you spot a second nightcap neatly folded on the chair beside your guest bed. Clearly the household expected a second sleeper. Sharing a room meant sharing gear. You sit up slowly, your headgear flopping like a wilted daffodil. The room has changed subtly. In the dim light, a sliver of morning begins to sneak through the heavy curtains. But you're not getting up yet. There's still more to notice. Next to the bed is a little box made of wood and lined with flannel. You open it to find another Victorian sleep staple, the nose warmer. It's exactly what it sounds like. A tiny cloth pouch like a miniature sock, worn over the nose to keep it from freezing off during the night. Some even came in velvet for the fashionable snorer. You lie back, trying to imagine the layering process. Stockings, flannel trousers, long nightshirt, shawl, nightcap, nose sock. Sleepwear in the Victorian era wasn't designed for ease or elegance. It was armour against the elements, and especially for women, it carried heavy expectations. A lady's nightdress had to be long, modest, and often high-necked with full sleeves. Even in bed, your virtue was meant to be visibly intact. You remember reading somewhere that early pyjamas were controversial when they first appeared in England. Imported from India, these two-piece garments were deemed far too exotic and masculine for proper women. Imagine the scandal of sleeping in trousers. As the wind sighs against the window, you feel the weight of history in every stitch of your clothing. You're wrapped in layers, not just of wool, but of expectation, and still none of it stops your toes from going numb. You adjust the nightcap one more time. The tassel swings and thwacks you gently on the nose. You sigh. This was going to be a long night. You try to find the warmest position possible, but the nightcap has ideas of its own. It slips sideways again, folding over your ear like a defeated flag. No matter how you turn, it's either dangling in your face or tickling your collarbone. You finally shove it back and lie flat, eyes open, adjusting to the peculiar weight of both the cap and the century. It's hard to overstate how serious Victorians were about headwear in bed. For children, it was often a knitted bonnet. For women, a lace-trimmed ruffle cap. For men, the classic pointed version you're now regretting choosing. And don't think they were optional. Even in the workhouses, even in the poorest homes, people tried to find scraps of cloth to fashion some kind of head covering. There was a belief, not entirely unfounded in those uninsulated homes, that letting your head go bare could lead to colds, nosebleeds, or even madness. There's a pamphlet you once skimmed, A Guide to Winter Health, 1851, which claims quite dramatically that the warmth of the head must be preserved lest the brain itself become chilled and melancholy take root. You smile at the memory, but the idea stays with you. The head as an emotional furnace. Chill it, and your very thoughts could sour. Maybe that's why they tied these caps so snugly. It wasn't just for heat. It was protection against the air, against dreams, against a cold world seeping in. Still, the garment doesn't exactly inspire confidence. You catch a glimpse of yourself in the mirror across the room and barely recognise the figure. Draped in flannel, swaddled in folds, capped like a pastry. You look less like a person than a bundled-up bundle. Your attention drifts to the fire grate. There's nothing but ashes there now, a faint warmth still curling off the ironwork. Earlier the maid lit it with great ceremony, not for ambience, but because in Victorian England people genuinely feared what would happen if you went to sleep in a cold room. Cold air was blamed for all manner of afflictions, rheumatism, lung fever, and even broken sleep that could weaken the spirit. A chilly night wasn't just unpleasant, it was considered dangerous. Hence the ritual: warming pans, hot bricks, fires, tea, and yes, nightcaps. Still lying on your side, you remember hearing that the wealthiest Victorians took things even further. Some had custom bed stoves, little ceramic boxes slipped under the sheets, heated by coals and removed before sleeping. Others paid for hot water foot baths before bed. In the grand houses, footmen would pre-warm beds using heated irons wrapped in cloth, tucking them between layers until the mattress steamed. You've got a slowly cooling brick and a cap that's threatening to strangle you. Sleep begins to take over at last. Slow and heavy, you let yourself drift a little, listening to the rustle of the curtains, the distant hoot of a night bird, the occasional scurry of mice overhead. The nightcap shifts one final time, resting gently over your temple. Strange how something so ridiculous can also be comforting. Maybe the Victorians were onto something. You exhale and close your eyes again. The bed creaks in protest, but you don't care. Not tonight. You're not alone in the bed. You realise this gradually, in that bleary, half-asleep way where things feel like dreams until they don't. A gentle shifting beside you, a faint exhale that isn't yours. Then the unmistakable sensation of a second body, too close, too warm, and very real. You freeze for a full moment. You wonder if this is part of the whole authentic experience. Maybe the hostess arranged for a local historian to sleep beside you for realism. Maybe someone got the room assignments mixed up. Or maybe, just maybe, this is exactly how things were meant to be. Welcome to the Victorian tradition of bed sharing. An entirely normal, if wildly uncomfortable, fact of life for many people back then. You slowly turn your head. Thankfully, the shape beside you is fully clothed and snoring softly, facing the wall. Probably harmless, possibly named Harold. In Victorian England, sleeping alone was a luxury most couldn't afford. Space was precious, heating was expensive, and beds, well, beds were communal furniture. Children slept with siblings, servants slept 2 or 3 to a mattress. Lodgers, travellers, and even total strangers were often paired up in inns and boarding houses without a second thought. It wasn't just about warmth, though that was part of it. It was about efficiency. One bed, multiple bodies, less firewood burned, less floor space taken up, and in certain households, even married couples weren't guaranteed privacy. It wasn't unusual for adult sons to bunk in with uncles, or for servants to share with other staff, or even the children they cared for. You shift slightly, trying not to disturb your unexpected bedmate. The mattress dips in response. These feather beds, soft as they seem, aren't built for subtlety. Every motion is magnified. You move your leg and the other side of the bed responds like a wave in slow motion. And then there's the smell. Nothing offensive, just the unmistakable combination of humanity after a long day. Wool dust, a hint of soap that's done its best. You imagine what it must have been like in a London boarding house with 5 strangers crammed into a rented room above a butcher shop. No privacy, no silence. Just snores and shifting limbs and an unspoken agreement not to ask too many questions. You stare at the ceiling and recall a story you once read about an 1860s rail worker who rented a bed by the hour. Not a room, a bed. He worked nights. Someone else worked days. They never met, just swapped sheets sometimes and left notes under the pillow if something urgent came up. It was called hot bedding. And yes, the mattress was still warm from the previous sleeper. You glance at your current roommate. At least they're quiet. You've heard worse stories. Lodgers with night terrors. Bedmates who talked in their sleep. Or worse, sleep walked their way right out the window. Even children weren't exempt. Victorian parenting guides sometimes recommended siblings share beds to foster moral discipline, as if having someone there would stop bad dreams or bad behaviour. You stifle a laugh which shakes the mattress and earns you a half snore from the other side. You're not sure what's more absurd, that you're sharing a bed with a stranger, or that you're starting to get used to it. The strange part isn't that there's someone else in the bed. It's that slowly but surely you begin to understand why it was normal. The room is still cold, the fire long dead. The brick at your feet may as well be a popsicle now. And yet, with another warm body beside you, there's a subtle shift in temperature, a soft buffer against the chill. This was the Victorian version of central heating. 2 humans in one bed. You hear a muffled grunt as your bedmate shifts again, tugging the blanket slightly. Not enough to start a war, but just enough to remind you every inch matters. Suddenly you understand why so many Victorian households had bed rules. Quiet agreements about blanket sharing, facing opposite directions or keeping to your half. You roll onto your side, careful not to elbow your companion, and find yourself facing the wall. It's close. Closer than it should be in a room this size. The wallpaper here, more peeling roses, has been yellowed by decades of lamp oil and soot. There's a faint dent where the headboard once thumped rhythmically, perhaps generations ago. You imagine the room's history, the parade of sleepers that passed through it. Perhaps a governess once shared this bed with her pupil. Perhaps 2 maids slept here on alternate nights. Or an ill uncle spent his last weeks on this mattress, whispering for more coal. The bed remembers, even if the sheets have changed. And then there's the social strangeness of it all. Sharing a bed with a friend? Acceptable. A relative? Expected. But with someone of the same sex but different class? That could get complicated. A master sleeping beside a servant? Scandalous, unless necessity demanded it. And if that servant was a woman? Well, now you're in a fog of innuendo and judgment that the Victorians would love to whisper about, but never openly discuss. Yet it happened often. Truth is, for the labouring class, a shared bed rarely suggested intimacy. It was purely practical, simple efficiency. After long shifts, people were too exhausted to assign meaning to closeness. Following 14 hours at the mill, your main concern wasn't your companion, but whether they were hogging the quilt or making too much noise. Listen closely. Your roommate is now completely asleep. The breathing is steady, slow, and even. You feel a pang of jealousy. Old Victorian conduct manuals cautioned young ladies about the peril of sharing beds in dorms or when working as servants. They labelled it emotional entanglement. For men, the danger was a fall from virtue, the dreaded notion of unnatural closeness. Yet, countless individuals did it nightly. You recall travel guides from the 1800s, where a place to sleep might mean a straw mat in an entry hall, or a space beside a hacking salesman in his underclothes. There were no online ratings, only hopeful wishes, and a coin slipped to the innkeeper. Even Queen Victoria herself, rumour has it, occasionally slept alongside her ladies-in-waiting while travelling, following protocol rather than personal choice. You feel yourself drifting off again, the heaviness of the thick blanket, the warmth emanating from the other person. The quiet is finally beginning to soothe you in this odd bed, in this foreign time. You start to grasp the reason beneath the awkwardness. Sleep in the Victorian era wasn't just a personal matter, it was collective survival. You close your eyes. Tomorrow will also be strange, but for now you yield to the subtle creak of the mattress and the heat of your temporary human companion. You awaken once more, not from sound, but because the atmosphere itself has shifted. It feels heavier, tighter. You blink in the dark and realise something is pressing down on you, not physically, but the very air. You reach out, and your hand brushes against a heavy cloth. Above you, a drape, specifically a canopy. You had forgotten this bed is fully enclosed by curtains. You grope for the edge and pull it aside. The rush of cold air is immediate, moist, sharp, almost stinging. For the first time you understand the Victorian obsession with keeping it out. This was the time of miasma theory, the conviction that foul odours carried fatal sicknesses. At night, nothing was more feared than night air, that unseen killer creeping through window gaps and under doors, bringing with it cholera, consumption, and various invisible afflictions. The solution? Seal the bed like a burial chamber, curtains, canopies, fabric borders. These were not just for decoration, they were vital health gear. The affluent had massive four-posters draped in rich velvet or silk. The middle class used sturdy calico or thick linen. Even the poor sometimes rigged up shawls or sewed together scrap blankets to create a sleeping enclosure. You pull the curtain back fully now, observing the tiny world you've been occupying. It resembles a cloth tent within a room, a microclimate, warm, stale, and strangely comforting, but also unsettling. There is no air circulation. Your breath hangs. You can detect every odour, the lavender tucked under the cushion, the lingering coal smoke, the moist wool of your nightshirt. You picture spending 8 or 9 hours in this curtained capsule, night after night, inhaling the same contained air, waking with damp lashes. No wonder they thought air could be deadly. The dread of night air was intense. Physicians advised against sleeping near open glass. Bed guides suggested placing the bed in the middle of the room, away from walls where drafts might enter. Some even believed you could contract pneumonia simply by leaving a curtain a sliver open. You look over at the window. It is tightly secured, naturally, but you notice something curious on the sill beyond it. Small cloth tubes, draft stoppers, sausage-shaped cylinders stuffed with sand or grains, positioned precisely to block air movement. You faintly smile. It's a campaign against the wind, and wind was only part of the threat. Odours were the true opponent. Bad smells were believed to transmit death. The mouldy scent of a sewage drain, the poverty stench, the smell of disease. Entire districts were deemed unbreathable, as if one could catch poverty by drawing a deep breath near the slums. So the defence was isolation. Beds within beds, layers of fine fabric and plush material, and strict routines. Close the drapes, light an aromatic lamp, hang a scented globe, enclose yourself in a protective shell, and pray that no bad air leaked in while you slept. You press a finger to the chill window glass. Outside, the world rests beneath a hazy moon. But in here, you are sealed off, protected. Or that is what you are meant to feel. You pull the curtain shut again, not from fear, but from newly formed habit. The air inside warms instantly. Your breath clouds the space again. It is not fresh, not really, but it is now familiar, and in a sense the Victorians were somewhat correct. It is simpler to rest when the world outside is shut away. You remain still under the drapes, listening to the muted sounds beyond the fabric, folds. Every noise is muffled now. No creaks from the floor, no movement from your bedmate across the bedding. Just your own breathing, amplified inside your cotton sanctuary. It's strangely peaceful, yet slightly confining. You gently lift the curtain's edge and peer out just enough to feel the difference. Cool, sharp air grazes your cheek. The contrast is so stark that it feels almost risky. And to a person sleeping in the Victorian era, it truly was. That anxiety about night air was not mere domestic superstition, it was integrated into public health regulations. Whole hospital sections were built to ensure windows were tightly closed after the sun set. Parents were warned not to let their children sleep near exposed glass. During the London cholera outbreaks, people fled cities not because of germs. They had no concept of germs yet, but because of the terrible smell. Bad air was thought to be lethal, and it dictated the layout of homes, beds, and even moral codes. Because yes, breathing improperly could be viewed as a sign of moral failing. Allowing cold night air in was not just negligence. It could be seen as indolence, recklessness, a failure to guard one's dwelling. So what was the general response? They transformed bedrooms into strongholds. Beds were not only for rest, they were defensive walls. Velvet drapes, canopies, rugs beneath the bed to stop floor drafts, heavy headboards positioned away from exterior walls. Some people even plugged cracks in the doors with scraps of wool or newspaper to keep the air inside. And in poorer dwellings, where these luxuries were impossible, they stacked whatever they possessed. Coats, rags, sacks, anything to retain heat and exclude the creeping cold. Even the act of getting into bed took on deeper significance. You didn't just lie down, you entered. You climbed into a sealed area, wrapped yourself in layers, and let the drapes fall around you like stage curtains. All of this for a bit of warmth and the hope that no corrupt fumes would settle in your lungs while you were unconscious. You reach out now and touch the edge of the curtain again. It is thick, heavier than any bedroom fabric you've encountered. Not smooth or light, but dense, as if its purpose is to guard something. Perhaps it is. Maybe in its own way, it is attempting to shield you from the remnants of outdated medical belief. You think again of the less affluent areas of the city. There, beds often had improvised curtains, old garments stitched together, pieces of sailcloth recovered from the docks. Entire families might sleep in one bed, surrounded by whatever they could gather to fend off the draft. In some slums, people even constructed bed closets, wooden enclosures just large enough for one person, sealed with a door to keep the air out, like a box, but warmer. And that was not the extreme of it. In mining communities and crowded tenements, windows were nailed shut for the winter, not to keep people confined, but to keep sickness out. Fresh air meant cold, and cold meant coughing, and coughing meant losing your wages, or worse, your rental space in the crowded bed you paid for weekly. You lower the curtain now and sink back into your private space of heavy air and wool. It is strange how a single piece of fabric can alter the whole mood of a night. Outside the curtain there is openness, sound, movement. Inside there is only you and the warm, quiet dark. You close your eyes. The curtain moves slightly with your breathing. And in this moment, sealed in like a note under wax, you finally begin to understand why Victorian sleepers were so strangely attached to their drapes. The next time you move, it is because your foot contacts something hard and unpleasantly cool. You instinctively pull back, kicking it away, and instantly regret the action. That was not a vermin, it was the brick. The same solid, coal-heated object the servant carefully wrapped in cloth and placed near your feet before you slept. The same one you were warned not to touch bare-handed unless you wanted a burn. Well, now it is loose and cold and pressing against your ankle like a cold rock. You sit up a little, wrestling the covers back. The feather mattress absorbs your every movement with a slow, soft sigh, making the effort harder than it should be. It's like attempting to escape a loving but overly affectionate relative. Eventually you locate the brick, now cool to the touch and almost as heavy as a gravestone. You gently push it toward the foot of the bed, careful not to let it escape and clang to the floor. A loud noise in the dead of night is all you need to wake the whole house and explain why you were kicking hot objects in your sleep. Still, even cold, you are somewhat thankful for it, because for a time, maybe the first precious hour of the night, that brick did its job. It radiated heat through the end of the bed, offered a momentary sense of luxury, and reminded you that in Victorian England, sleep was not just a natural occurrence, it was a carefully planned strategy, and the feather bed itself, that is another issue. At first glance it seemed wonderful, a soft, high peak of comfort. But once you settled into it, you realised the truth. It doesn't support you, it swallows you whole. Your back is now gently bowed into a U shape. Your legs float higher than your upper body. Any attempt to turn over requires both planning and momentum. And worst of all, the more you shift, the more the feathers move, creating unexpected bumps in places you prefer not to mention. Feather beds were considered the ultimate symbol of wealth in Victorian homes. Filled with goose or duck feathers enclosed in sturdy canvas, they were so valuable that some families passed them down through generations. But no one ever tells you they have a life of their own. There is an old saying from the era, "A bed too soft makes for a difficult morning." You are beginning to see why. Still, it is preferable to the other choices. If you were not in a feather bed, you might be lying on a straw tick, a canvas bag filled with hay, dried grass, or even seaweed. These were inexpensive, commonly used, and susceptible to dampness, pests, and annoying rustling. In poorer homes, people slept on wooden boards covered with old cloths or sacks of wool scraps, and in workhouses you received no mattress at all, only a blanket on the floor if you were lucky. But even feather beds presented difficulties. Too warm in the summer, too cold in the winter, unless you had that brick. And don't forget the upkeep. Every few months you had to beat the mattress outdoors with a stick to restore its fluff and remove any undesirable tenants. Feathers clumped, mould developed, and over time the centre of the mattress sagged like a damp pastry. You lie back now, your head sinking once more into the soft depression where others have surely rested before you. It is like sleeping in a warm, slightly disapproving swamp. You try adjusting your weight, hoping to find a new area that isn't already shaped to the contour of your historical fatigue. But the featherbed resists. Every part of it seems determined to hold you like a soft, deflated embrace. You are not quite lying down. You are being engulfed. And yet it is strangely comforting. Victorians viewed their beds as more than mere furniture. They were symbols of status, assets, even places of spiritual sanctity. A well-kept bed, especially among the middle and upper classes, was part of the daily presentation of moral order. Every morning it was fluffed, neatened and admired like a decorative display. A messy bed suggested laziness or worse, poor breeding. There were entire guidebooks on how to properly make a Victorian bed. Step 1. Shake the feather mattress with enough force to frighten any nearby animals. Then add the layers of linen. Bottom sheet tightly tucked, top sheet smooth but not stretched. Wool blanket, decorative coverlet. And finally, the feather-filled eiderdown, like a delicate topping for your personal sleep dessert. Tidy, systematic, morally sound. You glance now at your own untidy mound of bedding, and by Victorian standards, you are clearly headed for ruin. Still, the eiderdown is the one thing keeping in the heat now that the brick has cooled. It is a strange item, heavier than a regular blanket, but somehow lighter, like sleeping beneath a stuffed cloud. The stitching has become somewhat lumpy over time, causing the feathers to gather in patches, leaving warm spots and cool gaps like some bizarre internal climate. You shift again and feel something crinkle beneath you. Ah, the bed rubber. Not a charming term, but definitely part of the arrangement. It is a waterproof cloth placed between the mattress and the bottom sheet, intended to shield the bed from mishaps, spilled beverages, overfull chamber pots, or the occasional nightmare-induced accident. Some were made of oiled silk, others of plant-based rubber. Either way, they produced a faint crackling sound every time you moved, reminding you that rest here was a regulated affair. You wonder how anyone ever managed to sleep soundly, surrounded by all this effort and formality. But then you remember they were exhausted. Most Victorians worked long, punishing hours, factory shifts that lasted 14 hours, domestic staff who got up before sunrise and collapsed after midnight, farm workers who lifted, cut, stitched or cleaned until their hands were raw. By the time they reached their beds, comfort was a bonus. What mattered was warmth, rest, and the faint illusion of privacy. You close your eyes, attempting to feel what they might have felt. The relief of finally being horizontal, the pain in your bones muffled by feathers, the fading chill in your feet slowly being warmed under layers of wool quilt. And even the brick, yes, even that unpleasant hard lump of coal-heated stone was once welcomed like an old friend. You now understand why bedtime was a ritual. It had to be, because the world outside was harsh, unpredictable, and often merciless. But in here, beneath drapes, between feathers, above warm bricks and oilcloths, there was control, there was softness, there was, if not true peace, at least a momentary halt. And for the Victorian sleeper, that was enough. You are just starting to drift off again, sinking into the soft confines of the featherbed, allowing the last trace of warmth from the cooled brick to cling to your feet, when you hear a faint whisper. Not from your bedmate, not from the wind. It is coming from the far side of the room. Soft, shaky, barely audible. You freeze. Then another voice replies, louder, dramatic, female. I told her not to open that drawer, I warned her. And now your eyes are wide open, because, of course, they are sharing ghost stories in the dark just before sleeping, exactly as the Victorians were known to do. You peel back a small part of the bed curtain and squint toward the sound. There, near the fireplace, two young women are sitting cross-legged on a rag rug, huddled together over a single candle in a teacup. You recognise them now, household staff. They must have crept in after the lights were out, stealing a few precious minutes before their work begins again at dawn. You are not supposed to be witnessing this, but you are, and you listen. The tale involves a cursed drawer, a stolen pin, and a detached hand that appears at night to reclaim what was taken. One of the maids clutches the other's sleeve as she speaks, her voice rising and falling like a stage actress in a cold attic theatre. You cannot look away. Victorian bedrooms were not only places for rest, they were performance spaces, and ghost stories were a nightly custom, particularly for those who shared rooms or worked in service. In boarding schools, factory dormitories and servants' quarters, girls would gather after dark and trade tales of shadowy figures, headless soldiers, and hexed objects. It wasn't just entertainment, it was a rite. Many Victorians believed that nighttime was when the spiritual and physical worlds came closest. The boundary between realms grew thin. And dreams? Dreams were thought to be pathways. When a night vision was clear or happened over and over, people took it seriously. Whole volumes were dedicated to explaining them. Guides to slumber imagery, bound in worn leather with pages turned soft on themes like canines losing teeth or ceremonies that went wrong. You stir slightly in the mattress. The bedding shifts and the young women immediately quiet. One girl turns her head, eyes wide with caution. You stay perfectly still. She nudges her friend and whispers low, "It is simply the ghost bed. Do not worry." The other nods, as if this answers everything completely. You lower yourself slowly beneath the covers, allowing the drapery to close once more. And now your heart is racing, not out of panic, but from familiarity. Because suddenly the space feels like something remembered. A pause caught in the glow of the lamp, with trembling tones and a mutual sense of unease. You are unaware of how the narrative ends, but somehow it is unnecessary to know. Victorians were intimately familiar with mortality in a way we are not today. It was constantly nearby. Sickness, birthing, accidents, and when someone passed away, the rituals occurred right at home, occasionally in the very bed where you rest. Small wonder that spectral stories thrived. They were more than mere amusement. They were an outlet to process deep sorrow, anxiety, and the persistent mysteries that lingered when a person simply disappeared from the dinner hour. They made bedtime, which was already strange, sacred, and somewhat solitary, feel like a shared event. You listen once more. The girls have started a different story now. This one concerns a looking glass that never shows your own reflection after midnight. You pull the blankets over your head just in case, huddling beneath the layers. Your exhales warm the tiny space around your face, but you are not quite ready to close your eyes again, not following that detail about the mirror. You peek from below the fabric and hear the voices continue. Quieter now, almost respectful. The rhythm has changed. This is no longer just a frightening tale. It has become something more like a ceremony, nearly a confession. The girl with a sharper voice recounts dreaming of a gentleman in a dark coat standing at the foot of her bed once. He remained motionless, merely indicating the wall. When she awoke, there was a break in the wall precisely where his finger had pointed. A sudden chill runs across your head. The other girl explains her sister dreamt of rising water night after night for a full week. Then the flood came. It wiped out their family's business. Night visions hold meaning, she whispers, and you realise this is not performance, it is local law. For Victorians, dreams were more than random mental noise. They were viewed as indicators, warnings, sometimes even ethical messages delivered from the unseen world. There were local papers that featured weekly dream interpretations, yearly guides with complete charts for deciphering dreams, and well-used books on many nightstands detailing significance for symbols, from snakes to ink, spilled carelessly. You reach for your own pillow, wondering what interpretation would be assigned to a feather mattress slowly enveloping its occupant. Likely something related to excess or vanity. It was not merely the substance of dreams that captivated Victorians. It was also the method and timing of the dreaming process. There was a firm conviction that night visions were clearest when the sleeper was positioned in a specific way. Reclining on the right side was thought to be ideal. Sleeping on one's stomach, conversely, was believed to invite sinful thoughts or even the influence of demons. Certain instruction manuals even cautioned young women to avoid rich foods or romantic novels before slumber, lest their imaginations become unbalanced, and if you suffered from a nightmare, that too held significance. It could suggest a guilty conscience, exposure to unhealthy air, or the omission of one's evening prayers. You adjust slightly on the mattress, suddenly extremely conscious of how you are lying and what you might be inviting with the wrong placement of your spine. The hush talk fades away. You sense the maids have departed now, or perhaps they are just tucked into their own bedding nearby. Stories complete, light put out. The chamber is completely silent again, as if holding its breath. You close your eyes, and the instant you do, your mind begins to deceive you. You envision the gentleman in the black coat not standing at the base of your bed, but in the corner between the fireplace and the wardrobe, just beyond the edge of the curtain. You assure yourself it is merely an illusion of the shadows. But then you recall that looking glass the girl mentioned, the one that refuses to reflect your image after midnight. You want to chuckle, but your throat feels tight. It is only a story, you remind yourself. But stories possess staying power, particularly when shared in hushed tones by candlelight in ancient rooms with groaning floors and poor insulation. Especially when you have barely rested and the bed feels more like a snare than a refuge. You turn over and press your eyes shut firmly. Tomorrow you will forget all this, or you will choose to pretend you have. But tonight you rest beneath a blanket of 100 Victorian anxieties sewn together with old beliefs, starch, and the narratives we share to prevent the darkness from becoming too still. Your belly rumbles audibly. Naturally it does. You have been tossed around by a feather-stuffed behemoth, tormented by tales of mirror phantoms, and now your system determines it is time for a meal. You lie perfectly motionless, hoping the sensation will subside. It does not. Eventually, hunger prevails. You draw back the bed curtain and sit up slowly, careful not to disturb your bedmate or any lingering presence near the wardrobe. The floor feels cold beneath your socks. The air possesses that distinct nighttime quality, still, damp and heavy with the scent of coal dust and aged linens. Downstairs you suspect the cooking area is unoccupied, but not entirely closed. Victorian kitchens, especially in larger homes, frequently had something simmering all night on the stove, broth, stock, or that peculiar gelatinous dish you once read about. Calf's foot jelly. You creep through the passageway, candle held in your grasp, projecting dancing shadows on the flowered wall covering. Every single creak sounds like a shot being fired. When you reach the kitchen, it is colder than anticipated. Stone flooring, brick construction, a few glowing embers in the hearth, but certainly sitting on the counter is a bowl of thick golden brown jelly. You prod it gently. It shakes. This will be your late-night nourishment. Calf's foot jelly was a strangely popular food in Victorian England, created by boiling the lower legs of young cattle until the natural gelatin was released, then filtering, sweetening, and cooling the blend until it resembled a medicinal kind of dessert. It was consumed warm or cold, plain or flavoured with lemon and wine, occasionally served to the ill, sometimes to children, and sometimes, oddly, to individuals struggling with bad dreams. You raise a spoonful to your lips. It is warm, slick, surprisingly rich, somewhere between a thin soup and glue. It adheres to your teeth slightly, as if reluctant to be swallowed, but it settles in the stomach, and you must admit you feel an improvement. Victorians held the conviction that specific foods had emotional or spiritual impacts. Calf's foot jelly was classified as a nervine food, intended to soothe the system, fortify the body, and relieve agitated rest. It was even prescribed for overactive thinking or nervous female complaints, whatever that delicately phrased expression truly implied. On the shelf beside the fireplace, you notice other unusual nighttime remedies. A small container of malt syrup, a jar of cooked plums, something marked beef tea, all designed to nourish the weary, the restless, and the occasionally hysterical. You remember a section in a lady's household guide from the 1870s that suggested women keep a small amount of jelly or soup near the bed in case they awoke feeling a heavy heart. Just imagine that, a late-night jelly for sadness. You consume your portion in silence. Somewhere above, a floorboard groans softly. You pause, spoon still raised, but the sound vanishes. The fire embers crackle gently as you place the spoon in the wash basin and quietly make your way back toward the staircase. Your abdomen is warm now, satisfied in a way that only strange Victorian midnight snacks can achieve. And as you ascend the steps, you realize something else. Food was not merely sustenance back then. It was a remedy. It was solace. It was ancient belief, affection, anxiety, fear and control all blended into one preparation. Back in your room, you slip beneath the covers again. The feather mattress sighs deeply, the curtain breathes, and your body, softened by jelly and dust and approaching sleep, begins to drift. You lie there, filled with warm gelatin and questionable choices, your eyelids becoming heavy now. The odd comfort of that late-night bite hums faintly throughout your limbs. It was not precisely delicious, but it accomplished something. It calmed you, steadied you. Perhaps the Victorians had a point after all. Still, you cannot help but wonder who first decided to boil a calf's lower leg until it dissolved into wobbly sludge and declared, "Yes, this will cure sleeplessness." But then again, in a time when medical treatments included bloodletting and mustard plasters, perhaps jelly was not so far-fetched. Victorians did not just eat for physical need. They carefully selected their food for emotional stability, spiritual harmony, and of course moral strength. What and when you ate spoke volumes about your disposition. Nighttime nourishment, particularly, was rich with significance. The affluent might indulge in warm possets, milky beverages mixed with brandy or ale sipped from silver tankards in elaborate beds. The unwell and the aged were given barley water or arrowroot pudding, and servants whatever was left over from the master's evening meal, often cold, solidified, and discreetly consumed in the dark. But all of it was done quietly, eaten slowly, lit by candle flame or by residual coals. The custom of eating late at night was almost improper, especially for women. Victorian etiquette books cautioned that late-night cravings were an indication of emotional fragility. If you woke up hungry, you were likely eating too much during the day, or worse, suffering from a spiritual lack of balance. Which is precisely why many women kept their small meals concealed. You can picture it now. A miniature tin of jelly hidden beneath a pillow, a utensil secretly tucked away in a sewing basket. A whole secret world of covert, jelly-fueled persistence. It was not just females, either. Men who worked during the night, watchmen, railway staff, street lamplighters often carried portions of cold dessert in their coat pockets. One gentleman reportedly swore by a baked good dipped in warm beer to prevent his joints from stiffening before daybreak. Others relied on raw onions. You can only imagine the smell of that in a shared sleeping space. You shift again beneath the blankets and notice a very faint clinking sound near the bedpost. Ghost. You lean over and discover a glass container, the type used for sweetened beverage or syrup. A few sticky remnants at the edge suggest someone else had an evening similar to yours. Perhaps the last occupant of this room sipped a small amount of elderberry wine between scary stories. Or perhaps it was a nursery concoction, a mix of licorice root and vinegar, once believed to calm episodes of nervousness. You turn onto your side, breathing out slowly. What is most surprising is not how peculiar these practices appear, but how gentle they are. All these silent methods people employed to soften the night, to comfort themselves, to fill the stillness with something warm or sweet or sticky, to hold back the bad dreams or the chill, or the burden of a day that never seemed to fully conclude. You press your hand against your abdomen, still warm from the jelly and the candle's heat, and feel an unexpected moment of thankfulness. For the very first time, you're not simply observing Victorian life. You're inhabiting one of its smallest, most subtle aspects. And in a society so strict, so structured, so preoccupied with goodness and proper stance and modest clothing, perhaps a late-night jelly was the nearest thing to a small act of defiance some individuals ever experienced. You smile into the cushion, then finally, you sleep. Your rest is broken again. But this time, it is not a terrifying story or a loose brick that awakens you. It is a profound stillness, a deep, unnatural lack of noise, as if the world is holding its breath. Then, an instant later, you detect it, the distant sound of a door latch clicking, a soft set of footsteps, and something even stranger, someone humming, faint, without melody, and far too cheerful for this hour. You sit up abruptly, alarmed, but the room is empty. The sound originates from beyond the wall. You look towards the window, anticipating the first signs of dawn, but the sky is still dark, illuminated only by the faint light of a fading moon. You reach for your candle, relight the wick, and sit perfectly still, listening closely. The footsteps pass by. You lie back down, and as your eyes grow heavy, you wonder, is it not too early to be conscious? And then you recall something you had read, something unusual. Victorians did not sleep straight through the night. Instead, many of them practiced what is now termed segmented sleep. 2 separate periods of rest separated by a quiet hour or two in the middle. They did not label it insomnia, they referred to it as the watch. During this in-between time, often lasting from approximately 1 a.m. to 3 a.m., people would awaken naturally, sit up, light a candle, perhaps pray or reflect or eat or write in a private journal. It was considered routine, even beneficial. Some scholars believe it was a remnant from pre-industrial existence, when the rhythm of firelight and natural darkness governed human biology. Others suggest it was simply practical. In a world where the night was not silent, where infants cried, fires required maintenance, and chamber pots were a necessity, this first sleep and second sleep pattern made logical sense. And here you are, right in the midst of it. You adjust yourself under the covers and imagine what others might have done during the watch. One person might read a psalm or caress a rosary or whisper a worry into the dancing shadow. Some couples reportedly utilized this hour for quiet meetings. Nothing screams romance like a flickering candle and cold floorboards. Others wrote correspondence or contemplated, or simply sat watching the flames in the hearth sink lower and lower, with no intention of moving. You glance at the small writing table in the corner of the room. It is bare, save for a slim, leather-bound volume. You leave the bed again and open it. Inside are a few pages of careful, looping handwriting. A dream diary. Of course. Victorians were fascinated by dreams, not merely for entertainment, but for interpretation, spiritual understanding, even physical diagnosis. There were entire guides to dreams printed with meanings. Dreaming of teeth indicated a death in the family. Flying symbolized aspiration. A pale horse meant abundance. Unless the tail was braided, in which case it signified deception. Naturally. You skim through the pages. One entry draws your attention. 2:12 dreamt. I saw mother's pin glowing in the washing basin. When I reached for it, my hand passed straight through. Woke up with tender knuckles. You close the journal carefully and replace it. This quiet hour is no longer strange to you, this floating period between rest and being awake, visions and chores, night and almost morning. Back in bed, you fold your hands over your abdomen and let your thoughts wander. You wonder what details you will retain from this night. The feather mattress that consumes you completely, the jelly, the girl's account of the gentleman in the dark coat, or this strange, stolen hour where nothing occurs, yet everything feels alive. The room seems different now, not darker, not brighter, merely suspended. You lie there in the deep quiet of the watch, your eyes open, your breathing steady, not precisely dreaming, not precisely thinking. It is a space outside of time where the world appears paused, as if it is waiting for something, and in this odd in-between state, you start to observe things. The subtle aroma of soot clinging to the drapery, the sound of your breath fogging the inside of the fabric enclosure, the slow, deliberate creak of the wooden frame as you adjust the weight of one arm. You are not restless, you are attentive in a way you were not before. Perhaps that is why so many Victorians used this hour for quiet self-examination. There was something sacred about it, a time to confront yourself, without external noise, without obligation, without anyone observing. Just you and the shadows and the rhythm of your own heart beating in your ears. Not everyone spent this hour alone, however. You remember reading that some families actually planned for the watch. Mothers would feed babies, fathers might go downstairs to tend the fire or smoke a pipe in the chilly utility room. In some rural areas, neighbours would even visit one another briefly, exchanging news or natural remedies, all in hushed voices over a small light. Imagine knocking on your neighbour's door at 2:30 a.m. today, holding a cup of herbal tea and asking, "Trouble sleeping?" And yet for them it was not strange, because the concept of sleep as a single continuous block had not yet become the norm. That did not happen until artificial light became common. Gas lamps, then electric lights. That is when society began to emphasize productivity, efficiency, and sleeping uninterrupted for the entire night. But here, in the soft quiet of 1850, sleep was a conversation, not a directive. You turn onto your back and gaze into the darkness once more. Somewhere in the residence, a floorboard releases a soft sound. Not a footstep, simply the house, recalling something. You find your thoughts returning to the dream journal on the desk, the way the writing curled as if produced with a careful hand and a flickering light. You wonder who they were, what they hoped to discover in their dreams, what they hoped to forget entirely. And now, lying here, you are tempted. You reach beneath the bed blindly until your fingers touch a remnant of candle and a partially used graphite pencil. The house must anticipate guests like yourself. You tear a small piece of paper from the journal's blank final page and start to write. 3:01 am woke to an absence of noise. Thought I heard someone humming, realised I felt hungry, consumed jelly, dreamt of looking glasses, masonry, and a man who may have been me. You pause, uncertain if that last sentence is accurate or merely imagined. It does not matter. You fold the paper carefully and place it back where you found it. You are a component of the room now, one more observer in the lengthy sequence of half-sleepers who existed between the hours. As you settle in again, tucking your arms beneath the blankets and allowing your eyelids to close, a small smile appears on your face. The watch is concluding. Not with a sudden noise, not with a spirit, not with a moral insight, just with warmth and stillness and the gentle sound of a second sleep flowing toward you like a slow-moving current. Knock, knock, tap, tap, tap. You startle awake once more. This time it is not a small animal or a vision or a maid quietly discussing cursed pins. It is your window. You squint in its direction, momentarily confused. A pale blue radiance is beginning to gather along the frost-coated glass panes. Morning. No, not quite yet. You sit up and listen intently. The tapping returns, distinct, intentional, and oddly steady in its rhythm. It takes a moment for your sleep-confused mind to remember. The knocker-upper. Yes, that was a genuine occupation. In the time before alarm clocks were common or reliable, particularly for the working class, certain early risers in Victorian towns earned their income by waking others. These knocker-uppers walked the lanes at unbelievable times, tapping on windows with long sticks, lighter rods, or even hollow containers filled with dried legumes, and they were remarkably precise. You stumble out of bed and shuffle over to the window. Indeed, standing on the cobblestone street below is a heavily clothed figure wearing a coat and cap and holding a long wooden pole, staring up at your window with the weary patience of someone who has performed this service 300 mornings in a row. He lifts the stick and gives another gentle tap. Tap. You raise a hand in acknowledgement, though you are not sure he can actually see you. Then he turns and disappears into the early morning mist, heading off to rattle the next window on his route. It is strangely reassuring. The knockers were especially crucial in industrial areas where factory shifts began before sunrise and tardiness meant losing wages or one's employment entirely. Some were hired directly by the factories themselves. Others received payment straight from individual households. A few earned a living by waking entire streets, marching a pre-dawn route like an organised rooster. And no, they did not require another knocker-upper to wake them up. The best possessed internal biological clocks, human timepieces sharpened by routine, hunger, and the awareness that if they failed, someone else would take their place. You return to bed half amused, half uneasy. Imagine trusting your means of survival to a person with a stick and a reliable memory. Still, it clearly worked. Even Charles Dickens wrote about knocker-uppers, intrigued by their adherence to a schedule and their strange sense of importance. In parts of northern England, the job continued well into the 20th century, long after timepieces became widespread, because people maintained a fundamental trust in human beings over mechanisms. You pull the covers back over yourself, knowing it's futile. You are now fully conscious, but that second sleep left you rested. And the sound of the tap, its polite insistence, feels unexpectedly graceful. There's a distinct Victorian cadence to it. Human accuracy, silent obligation, collective order. Even your rest, you recognise, is not entirely yours alone. It belongs to the required schedule, to the individual with the long stick, to the routines that extend across the rooftops, through enclosed rooms, into warm, coal-heated beds like your own. Not every knocker-up used a stick. Some preferred dried peas. And blowpipes. Yes, blowpipes. You can picture it clearly now, a slight woman in a bonnet and scarf, aiming at your second-floor pane with a brass tube and gently puffing dried peas at the glass until you finally stirred. A comical image, yet one that is factually grounded. A few carried lanterns, some wore small bells, and in certain homes, the sound wasn't intended for just one resident. It was a rhythmic pattern. 1 tap for the matriarch, 2 for the father, 3 quick taps for the oldest boy. Entire sequences for waking up were transmitted across generations, communicated through window glass. You settle back down and close your eyes. Somewhere, another person is rousing now because someone made a sound and someone acknowledged it. You remain beneath the quilt, gazing at the canopy fabric above your head, mentally repeating the sound. Tap, tap, tap. Muted but persistent, nearly courteous. It seems as though the night itself offered you a gentle nudge and whispered, "Rise and shine, my friend. Do not be late." It is strange how something so minimal could carry so much consequence. For the people of the Victorian era, that small sound was not simply a summons, it was a necessity for survival. Factories operated on rigid timelines. Whistles blew at dawn, and overseers showed no leniency for tardiness. Miss your shift once, and you forfeited pay. Miss it twice, and you jeopardized your employment entirely. Families subsisted hand to mouth, and the knocker-upper's tap often represented the critical line between providing for the family or experiencing hunger. And these human alarms were not always men. In truth, many of them were women. Widows, specifically, often entered the profession to secure an income. Some were known to walk their designated routes with tall bamboo poles, tapping windows with an almost musical regularity. Youngsters would occasionally trail behind them, laughing as if observing a procession of the world's first timekeepers. You visualize a widow in a woven shawl, a lamp swaying at her hip, her cane extending upward at rows of glass panels in the faint, gaslit darkness. Each rap was a small assurance kept. Every window answered meant another coin earned. Some of these wakers had reputations for promptness so reliable that people trusted them more completely than public bells. Imagine being that indispensable, known on your block as the person who possessed time itself internally. And naturally, not everyone appreciated the service. There are accounts of groggy tenants who leaned out their windows and shouted insults, or worse, tossed chamber pot contents down at their wakers for arriving too eagerly. The irony is that they were generally the same people who pleaded for an additional tap the following day. You cannot help but chuckle softly into your bedclothes at the thought. Yet, the tapping at your own window lingers in your memory. It's more than a wake-up. It's a statement that even sleep was integrated into the social framework of the Victorian time period. Your rest was not exclusively yours. It was scheduled, watched over, interrupted and controlled by others. Even your nightly visions had required deadlines. You roll onto your side, closing your eyes once more, though you are aware the next phase of sleep will be brief. Morning is unfolding her existence outside, parting the curtains with light. But for a brief period, you allow yourself to drift back into that half-awake state, comforted by the realization that someone is still walking the streets. The cobblestones are being tapped, windows are being nudged in the fog, gently encouraging the world to wake up one glass pane at a time. The final thing you perceive before truly drifting is the slight echo of that measured beat. Tap, 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 as if time itself had a wooden pole and was maintaining the rhythm on the glass of your night. You turn over, drawing the bedquilt up toward your throat, only to notice something quite peculiar. You're still completely covered from neck to foot. The long flannel night garment clings to your skin, the thick hosiery irritates your ankles, and that bothersome nightcap has slipped over one eye again. You reach out to adjust it and sigh. This is no mere coincidence. This is Victorian sleeping attire, and it was never intended for comfort. It was meant for propriety. In a society where numerous people often shared one room or even a bed, how you dressed for slumber was important. You could not simply get in half naked. Even married partners often slept fully fastened, tied or laced into clothing that concealed more than it revealed. Because in Victorian moral standards, modesty was always present. You look at your sleeves, long, loose, gathered at the wrist with a modest ruffle. You would laugh if it were not so restrictive, and the neck buttoned high, practically touching your chin. Forget breathing easily. Forget turning over without difficulty. This garment was not designed for you. It was designed to maintain respectability, even at 3 a.m, and if you thought women had a difficult time, men were not spared either. The classic striped nightshirt hung like a religious robe, usually worn with a dreaded cap. It made sense in a chilly house, but it also meant you looked prepared to give a sermon. Instead of easing into bed, you shift your legs and feel the slight pressure of something rigid at your midsection. You sit up abruptly. No, it can't be. Yes. Your host had insisted earlier that you loosely lace up before retiring, which means you are actually lying here wearing a corset. A moderately loosened one, true, but still a constraint around your ribs, even as you attempt to rest. And this was completely typical. For many Victorian women, taking one's corset off completely was viewed as indecent, even risky. Medical advisories claimed that the body might collapse or the internal organs might shift if left unsupported throughout the night. So many women tolerated the compression for 24 hours a day. You carefully breathe out, attempting to imagine 8 hours of sleep like this. No tossing freely, no curling into a fetal position, only rigid posture imposed by whalebone and lacing, even while dreaming. Meanwhile, pyjamas, those now familiar two-piece outfits, were still new and considered inappropriate. Imported from India, they were seen as shockingly foreign, and worse, they resembled pants, women wearing trousers, even for sleeping. Social heresy. Yet by the end of the century, pyjamas would become popular among men, slowly entering women's wardrobes as well. But right now, in your restricting flannel dress and partially laced corset, pyjamas feel like a miracle. You pull the covers up higher and glance at the extra set of garments folded neatly on the chair. Spare sleepwear, kept ready in case of a fire, sudden visitors or late-night disturbances. Because heaven forbid you be caught in anything less than modest clothing if you had to rush outside or encounter an unfamiliar person. Your body is wrapped, layered, constrained, not free to recuperate, but dressed to convey a specific message. And the message is, in the Victorian world, even your unconscious mind had to be proper. You shift uncomfortably, adjusting the nightshirt's collar. It is truly suffocating. The fireplace has gone out. The air in the chamber is sharp, with coal residue and coldness, but somehow you are still sweating beneath the layers. You consider your own century where sleeping in a simple shirt or less is normal. Here, that would have been practically outrageous, because in the Victorian mindset, what you wore in bed reflected who you were when awake. A neat, modest nightgown suggested you were disciplined, honourable, and organised. Rumpled clothing, or worse, none at all. That signalled weakness, moral laxity, or even sin. Household manuals instructed mothers to monitor their children's sleepwear in case lazy habits formed due to the absence of suitable attire. Imagine, even your pyjamas were a part of your moral record. You look again at the corset binding your ribcage. Loosened supports, yes, but still tight enough to remind you of the Victorian preoccupation with order. The body had to be moulded, held, restricted, even when resting. There were stories of women fainting upon lying down because they had not sufficiently loosened their laces. And correctly so, though etiquette guides warned against completely unlacing. After all, a respectable woman was expected to rise from bed just as composed as when she retired. And men were not exempt either. A proper gentleman might wear a wool dressing gown over his nightshirt, a kind of early bathrobe, to ensure he never walked the hallway looking undignified. Affluent bachelors even possessed embroidered nightgowns, often monogrammed like formal wear. You picture yourself rolling over in bed with your initials sewn in gold thread on your chest, just in case someone checked on you at midnight. The absurdity makes you smile, but it also reinforces a truth. Victorian society did not truly allow for private identities. The judgment of morality was pervasive, even in the sleeping area, even in the darkness. You run your fingers over the thick seams of the gown, wondering how many stitches were needed. Some were sewn by hand by mothers or spouses. Others, in wealthier homes, were bought from specialty shops that focused on trousseau and intimate garments. The most exquisite versions were made of fine cotton or linen, trimmed with delicate lace that seemed intended less for warmth than for subtle display during household scrutiny. And of course, every piece had to be laundered. That involved washing days of boiling linens, scrubbing wool, and stiffening collars so firm they could nearly stand alone. Servants struggled with the damp piles through wringers and stretched them to dry near smoky fires. All so the master and mistress could appear morally sound, even while unconscious. You sigh and roll back onto your side. The nightcap slides over your eyebrow again, the tassel grazing your face. You could throw it off, but the thought of being found bareheaded, even here, even now, feels strangely defiant. So you leave it on, soothed by the ridiculous weight of propriety woven into every seam. You finally begin to drift off again, wrapped up like a morally correct package, envisioning not just your own dreams, but the dreams the Victorians felt you should have. Your mouth is dry, more than just dry. Scratchy, raw, as if you have inhaled the residue lingering from the previous night's coal fire. You cough once, then a second time, and the noise echoes in the small curtained room like a gunshot. Your companion stirs, mutters something, and pulls the bed covers closer around themselves. You sit up, throat burning, eyes tearing, and then you recall. Victorians had a remedy for this. On the small table next to the bed sits a glass container with a cork closure. You lift it and hold it toward the candle flame. A light-coloured liquid inside, somewhat cloudy, faintly herbal. You remove the cork and take a careful smell. Lavender, a hint of camphor, and something sharper, like diluted acid. This, you realise, is a sleeping potion, but not the dangerous opium mixed laudanum you have read about. Instead, this household prefers something milder, a mixture of plants, oils, and fragrant extracts intended to soothe the lungs and calm the nerves. You take a small taste. The flavour is sharp, almost medicinal, like chewing on a midnight garden, but almost instantly your throat relaxes, eased by the strange concoction. Victorian homes frequently prepared these sorts of homemade remedies. Lavender water was one of the most popular, believed to calm anxiety, relieve insomnia, and refresh the atmosphere. Camphor was also favoured. People thought it could repel bad dreams and purify the airways. Mothers rubbed it on their children's chests before tucking them in. You lean back against the cushions, breathing easier now. The scent lingers on your tongue and in the back of your nasal passages, sharp but strangely restorative. And this was only one of many aids for sleep in the Victorian repertoire. A small branch of rosemary tucked inside a pillowcase. A fabric pouch of dried hops hung above the bed. Vinegar sprinkled on the sheets. Even onion syrup, which some insisted would cure a restless night. As long as you could tolerate the odour, the reasoning was consistent. If night air was harmful, then scent the air yourself. Cover it, control it, fill it with aromas that signified health and security. You pull the drape back slightly and glance at the washing stand. There, a small container of dried flora rests, clearly intended to fragrance the space. Potpourri heavy with rose petals and cloves. Its aroma combines with the lavender potion still on your tongue, creating an intoxicating cloud of Victorian scent therapy. Was it truly effective? Perhaps only in the way routines always are, by convincing the mind that safety is restored, that the body can relax. You extend your legs beneath the covers and let the faint scent settle over you like an unseen blanket. The coughing has ceased, the liquid has worked, and for the first time in hours, you sense the potential for genuine recuperation returning. You smile lightly, understanding that in this world. Sleep was not simply sleep. It was something cultivated, managed, arranged, like a cultivated space. And each plant, each aroma, each routine was another element planted in the hope of achieving a peaceful dream. You close your eyes, and this time the darkness feels comforting. You settle more deeply into the bed, the slight fragrance of lavender still present in your nose, when you notice the small array of bottles lined up neatly on the washstand. You had not observed them before, glass containers, each with handwritten labels, peeling at the edges. You get up, candle in hand, and move closer. Chamomile tincture, valerian syrup, pennyroyal infusion, each one represents a chapter in the Victorian narrative of rest. Chamomile, gentle, soothing, still consumed in cups today. But valerian, that was the era's potent calming root, praised for its ability to quiet nervous excitement and sometimes even called the poor person's opium. Women prepared it in strong teas, pungent and earthy, the taste so intense. Some mixed it with natural sweetener or sugar to conceal the unpleasantness. Pennyroyal is more unusual still, not just a flavouring herb but one connected to women's well-being, used controversially as a menstrual regulator, despite warnings from medical practitioners against excessive use. Yet here it is, listed clearly as an aid for night meant to alleviate cramps and encourage the body to surrender. You tilt one of the bottles. The syrup inside glows dark amber, catching the slight movement of your candle flame. You can almost perceive the effort that went into its creation. the herbs soaked, the liquid filtered through cloth. The sugar stirred in slowly until it thickened, not purchased in some generic store, but prepared right here in a kitchen by lamplight. Like medicine passed down from one generation to the next, the Victorians lived at a junction of emerging science and deeply held beliefs. Germ theory was just beginning to take hold, yet households firmly held onto traditional remedies. Lavender and camphor might genuinely help breathing. Valerian might soothe the nervous system, but it was the ceremony that held the most significance. The act of pouring the potion, the scent of the cork, the quiet affirmation that the herbs would keep you secure until dawn. You imagine an anxious child being given a spoonful of syrup, told to consume it bravely, or a sleepless servant taking a sip from a cracked teacup before collapsing onto a straw mattress. In both situations, the flavour was secondary. What mattered was the feeling of being protected, and it was not only herbs. Some households swore by heated milk mixed with spice. Others burned aromatic gum or resin in tiny metal vessels to fragrance the air. A few even placed fruit into their bedside tables, believing the fragrance of fresh produce could purify a sleeping area. It sounds peculiar today, but in an age fearful of contaminated air, purity of scent was seen as purity of health. You take another sip from the lavender potion, allowing the faint bite of camphor to settle across your tongue. It is not delicious, but it is comforting. You return the bottle among its counterparts, each one like a guardian standing watch throughout the night. Back in bed, you recognise you are no longer resisting sleep. Your extremities feel heavy, your breathing deepens, and the strangeness of nightcaps, soft mattresses, metal heaters, and personal waste containers leaves your mind like smoke through the cracks of the curtains. For once, you are not simply resting. You're being carried by herbs, by routine, by the unusual fragrant attention of a household that truly believed sleep could be prepared in a bottle and consumed from a spoon. And tonight, perhaps they are correct. You awaken slowly, not due to a sound, but from physical discomfort. A gradual stiffness in your shoulder, an uncomfortable pressure at your neck, a dull ache in your lower back that makes you feel as though you have aged decades overnight. You stretch and immediately regret the action. Every joint protests. Your hips sink unevenly into the mattress, and your headrest has somehow twisted itself into a rough triangle of unreliability. You are clearly resting incorrectly. But if you had been a proper Victorian, that would not be an issue of personal choice. You slowly turn over, joints cracking, and recall something you once encountered. Victorians maintained there was a proper way and a moral way to sleep. Not only the hour or the clothing, but the exact position of your body, the angles, the bearing, the inherent meaning. In that era, resting posture was not about comfort. It was a required form. Lying on your back was considered suspect. That position was thought to encourage vanity, inappropriate fantasies, or worse, spiritual laziness. Sleeping face down was practically forbidden. Medical professionals cautioned that it put too much pressure on the chest and encouraged immoral thoughts. The recommended position was consistently the same. On your right side, body straight, legs extended modestly, hands either folded gently on the chest or tucked under the pillow, not underneath the body, and certainly never intertwined with another person. This was referred to as the Christian sleep. Some guides on etiquette even provided detailed drawings. Your arms here, ankles not touching, eyes closed softly, not too tightly, so as not to distort the features. To sleep gracefully with composure and discipline was to sleep correctly. And if you failed, if you produced noise, moved around, or heaven forbid spoke while sleeping, that too could indicate a weak personality. Sleepwalking was regarded with suspicion. Nightmares were thought to be a consequence of a guilty conscience. Restless movements could suggest an overabundance of emotion. Even sleep was a kind of display. You carefully rotate your neck and observe the bed frame, a narrow, metal-rimmed structure, barely wide enough for one person, perhaps two, if neither had a need for personal space. Victorian beds were frequently intentionally small. Why? to discourage spreading out, to keep the sleeper aligned, composed and compact. Children were even instructed to practice their sleeping posture, lying motionless for a few moments before closing their eyes, breathing regularly, saying a brief prayer, folding their hands. It was bedtime physical training, and if all else failed, there were devices. Some individuals fastened bands around their wrists to prevent their arms from shifting. Others placed firm, cylindrical pillows at their backs to prevent rolling over. One woman reportedly slept every night with a thin piece of wood tucked behind her spine to ensure moral alignment and proper digestion. You move again, attempting to imitate the correct pose. Right side, legs straight, hands folded. It feels unnatural, overly formal, like posing for a commemorative photograph. You cannot imagine resting like this for more than a few minutes. But then again, they did not expect sleep to be comfortable. They expected it to be proper. And for the Victorian mentality, proper sleep led to proper thought, which led to proper conduct. Everything originated from the posture of your unconscious body. You let out your breath and try to maintain the pose, but your left shoulder begins to ache almost immediately, and your knee keeps moving out of position. It is like attempting to nap while posing as a marble carving. Still, for a brief moment, you wonder what it would feel like to rest so quietly, so composed, so virtuously, that even your dreams were perfectly organized. You hold the Christian sleep position for as long as you can manage. 10 seconds, perhaps 12. Then your shoulder begins to burn, your hip sinks further into the unforgiving mattress indentation, and your left arm, dutifully folded, becomes numb with theatrical refusal. No, this is not sustainable. You roll onto your back with a sigh, the very position Victorians warned against. They believed lying face up left your soul vulnerable, exposed, susceptible to inappropriate thoughts, or worse, supernatural interference. One guide from the 1850s asserted that sleeping on your back made you more receptive to the influence of unsettling mental images, which sounds extreme until you recall the stories about the shadowy visitor. But it was not purely superstition. There were genuine medical theories linked to posture. Doctors warned that incorrect sleep positions could result in poor digestion, excessive bile, or an imbalance of internal fluids. Sleeping on your left side was thought to strain the heart. Sleeping face down could restrict the lungs. One doctor even claimed that improper posture could affect a woman's reproductive health, as it misdirected the flow of internal energy. You lie there now, arms thrown out freely, morally questionable in every respect. And it feels wonderful until you hear the sound of the clock. That bothersome wall clock has resumed its rhythm, louder now in the stillness, a slow tick, tick, tick that penetrates the quiet like a guilt-ridden metronome. You look at the fireplace mantel. The clock is constructed of dark stone, with gold-painted Roman numerals and a pendulum that swings like a disapproving gesture. Tick, tick, you are not sleeping correctly. Tick, posture reveals character. Tick, left shoulder is corrupted. Tick, you are a terrible person. You moan and sit up again, your back protesting loudly. Perhaps this is the true Victorian sleep experience, a struggle between physical discomfort, moral guilt, social etiquette, and barely suppressed fear. But still, there was a reason for their rigidity. The upper classes especially associated self-control with virtue. A calm sleeper, in their view, was a controlled person, while a thrashing, noisy, dream-talking individual. That was a sign of poor upbringing, emotional instability, or morally unsound habits, and it extended beyond the bed. Domestic staff were given instructions on how to behave while unconscious. Maids were told to sleep neatly, with arms at their sides and legs straight, in case their bedsheets appeared wrinkled and suggested carelessness. Tutors supervised the sleep positions of children as part of their moral instruction. There are even accounts of family members checking on one another during the night, not out of concern, but to ensure no one was sleeping improperly. You try once more to lie correctly, right side, hands together, ankles modestly separated. The candle flickers, the bed groans. You last approximately 8 seconds before giving up entirely and collapsing back into your genuine, unashamed, fully modern pile of limbs. Let the judgmental spirits look on. Because the reality is, Victorian sleep was not restorative. It was a performance, a rehearsal for waking life, a demonstration of order, posture and control even in your most defenceless hours. And while the feathers support your spine unevenly and the persistent clock marks each failure like a critical relative, there is something strangely comforting in all of it, because in this restrictive small bed, surrounded by rules and constraints and expectations, you are experiencing what it truly meant to rest like a Victorian. Not with ease, not in privacy, but correctly. Sleep eventually overtakes you, though not in the morally acceptable pose the Victorians would have preferred, and when it does, it is deep, heavy, and without dreams, until clang. You sit up abruptly, heart pounding. What in the world was that sound? Clang. There it is once more, echoing through the walls like a church bell being struck with a heavy object. It takes a moment for your mind to clear the confusion and recall your location. Not a railway station, not an industrial complex, a bedroom, a Victorian bedroom, and that noise, that unsettling. Clang. The timepiece. You focus across the room at the decorative wall clock, now the most irritatingly precise object in existence. Every 15 minutes it emits a small chime, but on the hour it rings like the arrival of the apocalypse. And it is not the only noise. Outside, something is wailing. Long, high-pitched, like a suffering animal, but it is not an animal, it is a street seller. Someone shouting, possibly fish or coal or baked goods. You cannot quite distinguish the words. The local accent is strong, the voice strained from use, and the timing flawless, right as your eyes were beginning to close. Welcome to the Victorian auditory environment. You had not realised how loud the night could be. You had assumed everything would be quiet in the past. Horse-drawn streets, hushed voices by candlelight. But no, the Victorian city never truly rests. And neither, apparently, do you. There is another clang, this time from the water pipes. Somewhere beneath you, water is moving. Someone is draining a personal waste container, refilling a washing basin. Who knows? The structure groans in response, its aged components shifting and sighing in protest. Then scratch, scratch, scratch. From within the walls, rodents, or possibly smaller vermin. In either case, you are no longer surprised. Victorian homes were shared with many uninvited residents. Mice, arachnids, flying insects, parasitic insects, even birds if a chimney was left open for too long. And in less affluent areas, rats dominated the flooring like unseen property owners. Audible, impossible to capture, and extremely bold. And that is just inside. You gently pull back the curtain to peer outside. The street is covered in a thick mist, but the outline of a person pushing a cart is discernible. A vendor, perhaps, already beginning their preparations for the early shift. Someone nearby is striking something metallic. Another is shouting about freshly baked goods. A child cries out in laughter or annoyance. It is indistinct. You lie back down and close your eyes once more. But the noises continue. A neighbour coughing, a window creaking, boots heavily walking on cobblestones. A distant canine barking as if protecting the Queen's honour. It is not peaceful, but, strangely, it is not chaotic either. It is simply the continuous rhythm of the city. In that era, you could not block out the outside world with insulated windows or a sound masking device. Noise entered through openings in the glass, fractures in the bricks, holes in the roof. And people accepted it. They slept through it, lived alongside it, even found a degree of security in it. Some believed that a silent street indicated something was wrong. You pull the thick quilt over your ears. It softens the worst of the noise. But the timepiece. Oh, that clock simply continues its march. Clang. You sigh dramatically. If the spectral beings do not get you, the street vendors certainly will. You lie completely still, attempting not to move at all, because every slight movement risks waking up the bed itself, not your companion. No, they are still lightly snoring in some plush, feather-filled dreamland. But the bed structure, it produces noise like a disapproving elder. Slight adjustments groan like approaching footsteps. One strong turn and it sounds as though the entire framework is about to collapse into a terrible situation. This is the reality of a Victorian city night, full of noise, layered and vibrant, all enclosed by thin walls and shared air. The old houses lacked modern soundproofing. Most were constructed with plaster and wood walls, thin doors, and loose window panels, which means you hear every sound. That couple next door speaking quietly before sleep, the maid 2 floors below coughing into a piece of cloth, a horse trotting past the window as if it is somewhere critically urgent to be at 4 in the morning. And then there are the street cries, fresh watercress, hot pastries, various seafood, baked goods straight from the oven. They shout like town criers, each one with their own tune, and in a peculiar way it is beautiful, like a discordant, peaceful song shaped by dirt and commerce. In many areas, these late-night calls were as dependable as church bells. You could set your internal clock by the pastry vendor or the chimney cleaner loudly announcing his presence in the narrow street below, or the person walking with his long hooked pole illuminating gas lamps with the calm confidence of a clergyman lighting altar candles. And speaking of clergymen, church bells. They also ring, even during the night, marking the hour, the half hour, the quarter hour, sometimes solemn, sometimes slightly broken, often unnecessary since half the homes contained their own striking clocks inside. And then there were the animals. City life meant people coexisted with creatures of every kind. Cats cried out on rooftops, dogs barked in narrow passages, and domesticated fowl, yes, even in London, made clucking noises in backyard cages and crates. Some Victorians kept milk-producing animals, birds, or even large farm animals in their yards. A synchronized sound of urban existence, none of it musically coordinated. You press the pillow over your ears. It is not helpful. It only softens the sound of your own heart beating. But here is the point. This was not considered disruptive. People adapted to it. They anticipated interruptions. No one relied on sleeping straight through the night, not with wakers at the window, clocks in the hall, companions moving around, rodents running, and the occasional vendor loudly selling items beneath your flooring. That is why beds were draped, why liquids were consumed, why feather mattresses were vigorously beaten, and personal waste containers were kept near, not for comfort, but to come to terms with the disarray. You lie there now, unusually calm, despite the racket. It is not gentle noise. It is a dense, cluttered, unpredictable, slightly absurd noise, and somewhere beneath it all is a repeating pattern, a lively centre of the city that never fully stops, not even when you close your eyes. You pull the covers up higher and allow the muffled world to continue its hum around you. One rodent scurries, one clock chimes, one vendor calls out, and still somehow you manage to sleep. You are not certain how long you have slept this time, but something feels incorrect. You wake up to the faint shifting of cloth, then the complaining of a wooden floor. And when you open your eyes, you witness it. A figure standing near the fireplace, absolutely quiet. You stop moving. It is your companion. But their stance is entirely wrong, rigid, eyes wide open, arms hanging loosely at their sides like puppet strings, waiting for movement. They are not awake, not really. They are staring at the wall, motionless, bare feet on the cold floor. You blink your eyes. Your breathing stops. And then, without any sound, they turn and begin to walk directly into the wall. You sit up quickly and speak their name, but there is no reaction, only a soft tap as their forehead gently presses against the plaster. You understand the situation. They are sleepwalking. And in Victorian England, that was a serious issue. To us, it is a strange occurrence, perhaps even humorous. but to Victorians, sleepwalking was a frightening puzzle, a phenomenon partly medical, partly moral, somewhere between an ailment and a secret disclosure. They called it noctambulation. Medical professionals argued whether it was caused by stomach vapours, emotional trauma, or a troubled inner self. Some even claimed sleepwalkers entered a spiritual realm moving between dimensions, disconnected from their physical form or the clock, and the peril was genuine. Tales circulated widely of somnambulists stepping out of windows, tumbling down stairwells, even igniting fires or vanishing outside the dwelling. One female was reportedly seen plunging into a watering trough in her nightdress, convinced she was washing clothes. Another man ambled onto the pavement wearing only a necktie and delivered poetry to a street lamp. Yet a further anxiety arose, that a sleepwalker's actions betrayed their concealed truths. If one pilfered an item while slumbering, did it imply a secret thieving nature? If they muttered a forbidden title, did it suggest their loyalty was already compromised? The Victorians were undecided. Was the behaviour involuntary, or a window into the inner self? As the physical defences drop, you rise cautiously, uncertain whether rousing your companion is wise. That too was a subject of debate. Some argued it was perilous, possibly inducing madness in the startled person. Others maintained awakening them was necessary, lest they fall or commit some unwitting transgression. The form in the gloom begins to stir once more, not toward you, but toward the fireplace. Their hands extend as if gripping a memory. You notice the bed warmer, an iron scoop still leaning against the bricks from earlier. It is cool now, but your own blood is not. You approach swiftly, gently, a hand placed on their shoulder. Soft voice. It is fine. Return to rest. They blink once, then again. A profound, trembling breath escapes their lips, and instantly the spell lifts. They allow you to guide them back to the mattress, heavy-limbed and submissive, already receding into whatever domain they had wandered from. No recollection, no queries, only slumber. You lie next to them, heart pounding. The Victorians may not have possessed the answers, but they were correct on one point. The mind at night is an unsettling and secretive entity, filled with wanderings, murmurs, and phantom-like figures that are not spirits. And occasionally, the most disturbing element in the room is the breathing figure right beside you. You remain awake for a time, even after your bedmate's breathing settles into an even rhythm. You keep stealing glances, half anticipating them to suddenly sit upright again or start reciting Latin in reverse. But they appear tranquil, as if the bizarre little performance by the hearth never occurred. You conversely are alert and restless. You recall those Victorian accounts, newspaper clippings, and hushed family legends about sleepwalkers who ventured onto rooftops, scaled railings, or spoke tongues unknown to them while conscious. One woman supposedly embroidered a complete handkerchief while entranced, the needle flashing in the lamplight, her gaze vacant and fixed. And the most disturbing aspect: these narratives were not routinely dismissed. People granted them credence. To sleepwalk in the Victorian period was more than merely disquieting, it was profoundly suspicious. Somnambulism dissolved the barriers between awareness and subconsciousness, between deliberation and reflex. And in a society that valued self-control, nothing was more frightening than an individual moving without conscious intention, especially a woman. Female sleepwalkers were perceived as particularly alarming. Literature of the period is replete with excitable female characters who roam in their nightgowns, revealing hidden facts or admitting to desires they would never dare articulate while awake. Their sleepwalking was interpreted as both a medical condition and a moral shortcoming, a physical manifestation of concealed guilt or illicit feeling. Even genuine cases were scrutinized not solely for health, but for character. Was she excessively educated, spiritually feeble? Had she indulged in too many Gothic novels? For males, sleepwalking was occasionally excused as the lamentable consequence of excessive labour or trauma. But just as frequently, it conveyed sinister connotations. A man discovered rambling at night might be accused of harbouring criminal intentions, even if he retained no memory. The sleeping male exposes the secrets the waking male conceals, one pamphlet ominously declared. Consequently, families became secretive. Sleepwalkers were discreetly relocated to private quarters, locked inside, tied to the bed frame with soft material, or lightly secured beneath heavier blankets. Some were obligated to wear small bells on their wrists, so that any movement would be audible. You glance again at your bedmate. There is no bell, only a subtle sheen of perspiration on their temple, and a slow, regular breath. Whatever tempest possessed them has now subsided. You doubt they will recall it, most likely not. But you will, because there is something deeply unsettling about observing a person walking devoid of will, eyes open, mouth closed, hands reaching for something unseen. It compels you to question where the true division lies between sleeping and waking, between security and self. And in a society like Victorian England, where moral conduct was monitored like finances and virtue was demanded even in repose, sleepwalking was not merely eccentric, it was perilous. Because if you could betray your better judgment while unconscious, then perhaps you were never truly virtuous initially. You sigh, draw the blanket back up to your chin, and attempt to erase the image of that pallid figure by the hearth, suspended in the gesture of reaching. Just another Victorian night, you remind yourself, with solid walls, sugary preserves, and phantoms composed of flesh. You close your eyes and hope your feet remain precisely where you put them. You awaken in a different bed. Not a different chamber, merely a different bed. Gone is the feather-stuffed curtained softness that attempted to envelop you entirely. This one is smaller, tighter, harder. The mattress is thin, possibly filled with straw or animal hair. The coverlet is coarse wool, and there is no warming brick at your feet, no decorative pillowcase, no lavender scent on the sheets. You are now in the servants' accommodations, or perhaps the attic, possibly the cellar. It is hard to determine. There is no window here, only a low roof, exposed support beams, and a solitary iron hook bolted into the wall that you prefer not to contemplate too deeply. The air carries the odour of damp stone and stale laundry. Somewhere above, footsteps creak, another person's sleep concluding just as yours commences. This is how the other population rested, or more accurately, how the working class attempted to rest when they were afforded the time. In affluent Victorian residences, sleeping arrangements mirrored the class structure itself. Upstairs, the master and mistress might enjoy four-poster beds, feather comforters, and fires kindled by the domestic staff. But below, far below, that same staff were curled up in narrow, unheated compartments that barely accommodated a cot, let alone dignity. You shift on the mattress and instantly feel the wooden supports beneath it. There is no frame, just a simple platform. Or in certain instances, the bed might have amounted to little more than a blanket spread upon a trunk or bench. If there were vermin, you managed them. If the unsound roof leaked, you located a dry spot. Sleep was not sacred here. It was practical and not invariably solitary. Many servants shared a bed with 2 or 3 others, lying horizontally, head to toe, to conserve room and body heat. Privacy was a luxury they could not afford. Beds were not always assigned based on position either, simply rotated, shared like work clothes. If you were fortunate, the previous occupant had left the mattress warm. You press your palm against the sheet. It is still slightly moist from whoever occupied this spot last. Even the timing of rest was altered. Down here, servants frequently awoke before dawn and retired after midnight, managing only 4 or 5 hours if they were lucky. They took turns sleeping during extended functions, dozed upright in chairs, or nodded off in stairwells while awaiting the next summons. And children? They fared worse. Apprentices, kitchen assistants, housemaids as young as 10. Most slept wherever they were instructed, beneath staircases, on makeshift beds, in the cookhouse, in outbuildings behind the residence. some even nestled beneath the substantial cast-iron ovens that never entirely cooled, soothed to sleep by the faint residual heat of the prior day's fire. You survey your current quarters. There are no pictures on the wall, no bedside table, no chamber pot, just a plain wooden container at the foot of the bed, perhaps for clothes, perhaps for secrets. Your work boots rest beside it, dusty and worn. Here, sleep is not a sanctuary. It is a hiatus, a borrowed moment, a breath before the next obligation. And somehow the silence here feels heavier. Not because it is peaceful, but because you know how swiftly it will be shattered. The quiet does not endure. It never does. Down here, above your head, the floorboards echo with the footsteps of those rising early, the cook, perhaps, dragging open the kitchen door, a boot cleaner stumbling toward the hearth with fuel. Pipes whine as water begins to circulate throughout the house. Somewhere distant, a bell chimes once, faint and conclusive, like a notification that whatever rest you managed to seize is now past due. You sit up. Your body aches, not from work, but from the bed itself, an uneven, unforgiving plank pretending to be a place of rest. You stretch your legs and feel something give in your lower back. The blanket slips off with a damp heaviness, smelling subtly of pest repellent and mildew. There is no fine linen here, no quilt, no decorative border, just the necessities. The servant's sleep was not expected to be opulent, only sufficient to prevent collapse. Even in the wealthiest households, staff were often provided the bare minimum. In fact, some families believed that excessive comfort fostered idleness. If you were not slightly stiff in the morning, were you truly earning your wages? You step onto the cold floor. The boards are unpainted, splintered in spots. You slide your feet into rough woolen socks and begin to dress rapidly as if summoned. Although no one has called for you yet, you are already behind schedule. And as you struggle with the stiff fastenings of a borrowed vest, it occurs to you that not all servants had beds at all. Night labourers, those who emptied night soil buckets and transported waste from the city, often napped beside their wagons. Dock workers slept on wooden boxes between shifts. Seamstresses dozed upright at work tables, heads resting on folded arms, needles still attached to their sleeves. For them, sleep was a fragmented luxury. A brief rest here, a doze there. Their dreams came in pieces between metallic sounds and commands. And then there were those who purchased sleep by the hour. In the worst of the city's poverty-stricken areas, there were 4-penny beds, named for the price. You did not receive a room, you received a space, a spot, sometimes in a shared swinging cloth, sometimes on the floor with 20 others in coffin houses. The term was not figurative. You literally paid to sleep in a wooden crate. Worse still were the penny hangs. For a single coin. You could rest in a small room by hooking your arms over a taut rope stretched across the space. You did not lie down. You leaned, dozed, dangled. When daybreak arrived, the rope was cut or lowered, and everyone fell onto the floor. No mattress, no warmth, merely the concept of rest. You glance back at your narrow cot. Suddenly it feels extravagant. The straw-filled cushion, the harsh wool, the wooden container next to it. You could be far worse off. Many were. And as you step into the passageway, the cold air winding around your ankles, you experience a peculiar sense of respect. Because here, in the shadows, where servants sleep in shifts, dream silently, and rise without complaint. Sleep is not an escape. It is a halt, brief, essential, accepted with quiet appreciation. Not a privilege, not even a custom, simply a pause in the long, long workday. You have moved beds again, but this time it is neither a soft feather mound nor a straw-filled servant's cot. It is summertime, and the air is dense, sticky, sluggish, heavy with the aroma of heated brick, animal fat, smoke, and sweat that has been permeating the sheets for days. The window is held open with a spoon. The breeze refuses to materialize. And you are tossing in a tangle of wrinkled cloth, irritating wool, and something unidentifiable that may once have been a curtain. This is the Victorian summer bed, and it is resisting. It begins with heat. Not a modern climate-controlled discomfort, but a stagnant heat. Heat that ascends the walls and penetrates the mattress. Heat that adheres to your hair, your socks, your pillow. Heat that renders sleep impossible and leaves you vulnerable. Vulnerable to everything else that flourishes in the darkness. The initial sting arrives swiftly, not painful, just a light sensation. Then another, then another. You sit up and swat at your neck. Welcome to the true proprietors of the Victorian sleeping quarters. Bedbugs, body lice, fleas and gnats. Victorians engaged in a constant war against them. Entire newspaper columns were dedicated to the subject. Household guides offered full sections. And yet most households simply acknowledged them as an inescapable element of existence. Like chipped plaster or chimney residue, the adversary was tireless, particularly in the summer. Mosquitoes clustered near stagnant water inside and out. Fleas nested in mattresses made of straw. Bedbugs colonized the gaps in the bed frames. Lice resided in the bedding and behind ears and within the seams of head coverings. The itching was endless. Some families retaliated with vinegar washes. Others soaked fabric in oil and jammed them into cracks in the walls. The more desperate sprinkled mercury powder beneath their sheets. Yes, mercury. Believing the fumes would eliminate the pests before they eliminated the sleeper. It was a risky gamble. You now sit in your own damp bed, scratching a fresh welt on your ankle. You have lit a small piece of candle and are fanning yourself with a folded sheet of the daily paper, which achieves nothing. Somewhere nearby, something makes a faint noise, possibly a small rodent, possibly just the mattress, sighing under the burden of its lengthy, irritating history. The thick covers offer no relief. Victorians preferred wool even when the air was hot. Fine linen was too costly. Though cotton allowed air to pass, it was often viewed as inferior or only fit for clothes worn underneath. So, your underbedding meant for winter, while the night air is steamy around you like broth on a stove. And that leads us directly to the smell. Victorian summers had a strong odour. Even the wealthiest households struggled to keep it out. Coal dust landed in every corner, oil lamps left oily black marks, windows almost never stayed open. Do you remember the dread of breathing night air? Also, washing took days to dry. Beds were rarely aired outside, and people, well, they perspired heavily. Not everyone had the resources or the water to clean themselves frequently, so the bedroom, particularly during the hot months, became a peculiar mix of scents and difficulties. Sachets of lavender hung from bed frames. Bowls holding lemon slices were placed out to cleanse the air, but these were desperate acts. They were like small bandages on a gaping wound. You wipe your brow with your sleeve's edge. This is going to be a long night, and the hot season has only just arrived. You lie still, damp with sweat, situated beneath the most lightweight blanket you could find. It is still too much. The air is stagnant. It hangs like a wet screen around your body, and inhaling feels like taking a sip of tea through fabric. You swipe at another insect, miss it entirely, and feel your patience begin to fade right along with the candle wax nearby. Victorian summer nights were not just unpleasant. They were constant battles. You were not expected to rest well. Rather, you were expected to endure, and people certainly tried to push back. You glance at the candle. Its wick is cut too low to give much illumination. Next to it sits a small porcelain dish of vinegar, put there earlier by a servant to deter flying pests. It is not helping. The room still faintly buzzes with the sound of wings. In more affluent homes, they might burn dried plants in shallow copper containers such as rosemary or lavender, and occasionally even sulphur. The goal was to force the insects out, or at least to make them silent. Sometimes this had an effect. More often, it simply made it harder to breathe the air. You pass your hand over the wood headboard, feeling the familiar edges there, grooves and scores that were not originally part of the decoration. Someone attempted to scratch out nests of bedbugs. This was normal procedure. You remember? Every few months, the whole frame would be taken apart, examined by lamplight, and aggressively cleaned with very hot water and lye, sometimes using turpentine. In shared houses and crowded apartment buildings, people would hang their bedding on outdoor lines in the sun, hoping the heat would eliminate what cleaning could not. But not all creatures came for your blood. You hear it now. Scritch, scritch, scritch. The sound is impossible to mistake. Mice or maybe rats, perhaps both. Rodents were a normal element of Victorian homes, like eating utensils. They lived within the walls, underneath the floors, behind the coal storage area. They chewed on everything. Soap, wax, bones, books. They scurried over blankets in the darkness, and they left behind evidence. You tuck your feet up higher beneath the quilt. There were methods, naturally, such as spreading flour close to the wall corners to trace their prints, keeping hunting dogs, or lining those corners with peppermint oil or animal fat mixed with poison. But again, these were hopeful measures, small victories, and the danger of their return was constant. You shut your eyes, trying to ignore the scraping noises in the wall and the imaginary tingling along your lower legs. But the sound continues. Even the walls seem to move. In summer, wood swells. Plaster develops cracks and pipes groan from the day's warmth. Someone above you opens a window. A few seconds later, they slam it shut again, as if suddenly recalling that the air at night is lethal. And still, there is no movement of air. Victorian handheld fans, those delicate folding ones, were primarily for show, intended for romantic games, not for practical use. For true air movement, people waved newspapers around, flapped covers, or relied on crank-operated devices that droned like insects and stirred up only false hope. You try not to move at all, worried that even the slightest shift will restart the tingling, the biting, the intense heat. Eventually, you give up. You kick the blanket off, disregard the codes of decency taught in Victorian sleep guides, and lie spread out on the narrow mattress, giving in to your quiet protest. Perhaps the fleas will take pity. Perhaps the mice will get tired. Perhaps the sun will appear soon. But until then, you learn what countless people before you learned in the suffocating stillness of a Victorian summer. That sleep is not always easily found. Sometimes it is earned through patience, bites, perspiration, and silence. You wake to the sound of bells, not the large church bells that sound across the city. These are smaller, higher-pitched, closer ones, one bell high-pitched, the other deeper, both ringing from somewhere above. One signal means bring the tea, the other means prepare the bath, and neither sound shows any concern that you just barely closed your eyes. You are in a town dwelling now, not a massive estate. The space is more confined, but the social structure has not changed one bit. You are in the servants' room again, this time off a narrow passageway near the cooking area. The floor slopes, the ceiling dips, and the wires for the bells run along the walls like blood vessels. And your body instinctively knows what to do. Get up, get dressed, do not waste time. But this morning something is different. You glance down and realise you never removed your shoes because last night you did not truly sleep so much as rest briefly between tasks. The lady of the house had company. Dinner lasted until 11 and candles burned until 1. Someone dropped sauce on the main room rug and wanted it cleaned before daybreak, and the household cat escaped again. You finally slipped into bed around 4. Now it is 5:30. This too was Victorian rest, especially for those employed in service, in small businesses and factories, or in homes where there was no clear stopping point. The concept of 8 continuous hours was not the norm. In fact, it was not even expected. Victorians did not measure rest the way we do now. They measured productivity. If you did your job, nobody asked how much rest you had gotten. You trudge down the passage toward the wash area, and that is when the scent hits you. the smell of oil. You blink toward the cooking stove and see it, a partially melted nightlight, the type purchased in pharmacies and kept in bedrooms with children or worried elderly people. A soft gel-like substance in a tiny dish that burns low and lasts a long time. Not primarily for light, actually, but for comfort. Victorians, despite their advancements, were afraid of the dark. Not just metaphorically, they were genuinely fearful. In less wealthy houses, people slept near open flames, candles, oil lamps or coal stoves, not because it was smart, but because completely dark rooms invited trouble, rodents, or worse. Even in wealthier homes, gaslighting might be left faintly hissing all night, producing a faint light that smelled slightly of decay. You walk past the pantry where a young boy is already dozing upright on a sack of flour, his chin resting on his chest. He is sleepwalking, not in the dramatic sense, but in the truest sense, moving while sleeping. The body keeps going, the mind is elsewhere. This was ordinary, widespread, unacknowledged, and risky. There are stories, whispered quietly among kitchen workers and laundry maids, of people falling into water tanks, falling asleep at the wringer, mistaking stairwells for their bedclothes. Because when rest is broken into pieces and layered in between work duties, it becomes something else entirely. Not restorative sleep, not recovery, simply a temporary pause. You light the stove and flinch at the sudden heat, and you remember, not for the first time, that in many aspects of Victorian life, the only individuals allowed to rest deeply were those rich enough to pass the burden of waking up onto someone else. You pour the water for the morning tea, still barely awake, and the kettle screams louder than the bells ever could. Your hand shakes, a splash hits your wrist and burns you. You bite your lip, stay quiet, and finish pouring. No one cares that your hands are trembling. No one asks if you have slept, because here is the rule. If you are still standing, you are still useful. And if you are useful, you do not require rest. Victorian belief systems wove this idea into every aspect of daily existence. Rest was for the weak, for the lazy, for the sick, or even worse, for the sinful. Early to bed and early to rise, they would say, makes a person healthy, wealthy, and smart. But no one clarified how early was early, or how little was insufficient. You carry the tray up the staircase. Every step creaks beneath your weight, not from being heavy, but from being walked on repeatedly. You have climbed these stairs 1,000 times, and on evenings like the last one, you have done it with your eyes open but your mind detached. It was once called second sleep before the industrial age forced people into strict schedules and factory shifts. Many Victorians and their ancestors actually rested in 2 phases. A first rest from sunset until midnight, then a period of wakefulness, perhaps an hour or 2 for praying, for writing, for watching the fire, then a second rest until the morning. But by the middle of the 1800s, with gas lights burning brightly and train whistles sounding, the 2 sleep model started to disappear. Urban living demanded continuity, stores opened earlier, trains ran at dawn, employers expected people to be on time. Suddenly, rest had to fit a schedule, not a natural cycle. You get to the lady's door and tap lightly. She calls you inside. Her room is cool and dimly lit. A maid has already closed the shades. Her bed still holds the slight impression of where she slept. A book lies face down on the covering. She slept late and peacefully. You place the tray down, and as she offers her thanks, you nod without looking directly at her because you notice what she does not. That while she was dreaming under fine material, you were counting silverware. While she turned her pillow over for the cooler side, you were scrubbing spilled sauce with a stiff brush. And while her rest was restorative, yours was simply transactional, a payment you made for a few more hours of being functional. You leave quietly, closing the door behind you. Downstairs again, the corridor comes to life. The boy in the pantry begins to stir. Someone coughs. The bell rings again, and you know this is how the day begins. Not with the sunshine, not with a cup of coffee, not even with full consciousness, but with a deficit of rest so deep it resonates in your very bones. You put the kettle away and for one quick moment consider stealing another short nap before the morning meal begins. But the bell rings once more, and duty always prevails. The sun is high now, but inside this narrow dwelling it feels like perpetual twilight. You are in a back bedroom, the kind that does not receive much light, even on a sunny day. The windows are tiny and hazy with years of coal residue. The curtains are heavy, but it is not the dimness that holds your focus. It is the cradle, small and made of wood, pulled close to the bed. You did not expect to see it, not here, not in a room this size, but it is present, partially covered by a faded blanket, a Victorian paradox in plain sight. Because for all their strict rules and customs about sleep, Victorians had some of the most confusing, haphazard approaches to infants and nighttime care you have ever encountered. And now you are about to experience it yourself. You glance around the room. There is no rocking chair, no changing surface, no electronic baby monitor naturally. Just a chipped ceramic bowl on a wobbly stand, a broken teacup on the floor, and the unmistakable odour of old milk. Someone has left a book open next to the cradle. You lean closer and read one sentence. It is most unwise to spoil an infant by responding to every single cry. The Victorian child-rearing manual's central principle. You pause. The next page recommends rigid feeding schedules, walks outside in all types of weather, and most remarkably, that babies must learn to comfort themselves by being left alone at night, sometimes even in a separate room from birth, if the house design allowed it. You peer into the crib. The baby is resting for the moment, but you know what is coming. Victorian infants, like all infants, cried, but the way their cries were addressed was different. In working-class residences, the baby might share a bed with the mother, more out of practical necessity than emotional attachment. Feeding was easier that way, and space was limited. But in middle and upper-class homes, there was a push toward strict organisation that meant timed feedings, timed naps, timed everything, even if the infant did not cooperate. Crying at midnight? Let them cry. Night terrors? It builds character. Restless sleep? Perhaps the child is morally weak. You breathe out, and suddenly the baby stirs. One kick, one soft sound of distress, one tiny hand curling in the air. Here we go. You look around. No childcare provider in sight, no nursemaid. Just you and the silent expectation of every instructional book ever published. You attempt a gentle shushing sound. The baby frowns. You sway back and forth a little. The baby makes a small grunt. You hum a tune, something old and slightly off-key and probably from Scotland. And finally, thankfully, the child drifts off again, but not before you notice something small. A tiny cloth packet under the crib mattress. You pull it out. Lavender pressed between fine mesh. A makeshift charm for sleep, likely placed there by a desperate mother nurse or grandmother who understood what the written guides did not. That sometimes comfort matters more than the clock. You slide it back into place because here, in the dim light of this room, rules become less important. There is only the rhythm of a tiny breath and the realization that Victorian rest, even for the smallest members of the family, was caught up in beliefs, fears, and expectations far older than the child itself. You sit on the edge of the bed, watching the baby's chest rise and fall in the soft darkness. It is quiet now, almost strangely so, but you have seen enough of Victorian life to know that stillness can be deceiving. The mother returns, quiet at first, then making soft sounds as she kneels next to the crib. She does not speak to you, simply pulls a section of the blanket tighter around the infant and adjusts a worn piece of soft cloth at the baby's neck. Then she performs an action that surprises you. She reaches under the crib, takes out a small book, not a childcare guide, but a general household reference, and starts reading softly to herself. Not a story, not religious text. Weather predictions, moon phases, meal times, dream meanings. You realise what is happening. This is not just a ritual for sleep. It is a form of protection for the baby, for the night, for the uncertain hours between evening and morning. A time when mothers had little control and even less medical advice. In an era when infant death was tragically common, folklore and ritual took the place of ineffective medicine. Some families attached red coral beads to babies' sleepwear to ward off bad spirits. Others hung iron scissors near the crib to cut through frightening dreams. And some, like this mother, believed strongly in repeating rhymes, following routines, and using soft, well-used good luck charms passed down through generations. She notices you watching. "Ignore the books," she whispers. "They never hear the crying." You nod because the reality was this. Victorian parents were told to disregard a baby's cries, but most could not, or refused to. The manuals preached order, but life required adaptation. In higher-class homes, nursemaids enforced strict discipline, but often secretly comforted the babies when no one was watching. In poorer homes, sleep routines were dictated by necessity. Older siblings sharing beds, infants rocked while necessary work was done or tightly wrapped and placed into drawers. Yes, actual drawers, not metaphorical ones. Real wooden drawers, sometimes taken from chests and lined with soft material, served as temporary cradles. A quiet spot, a warm place, and the hope that the child would sleep just a little longer. The baby stirs again, and the mother hums a low melody. This time the tune sounds slightly familiar, a mix between a gentle song and a sad march. You wonder how many infants heard the same song, how many mothers swayed in the dark, disregarding the written rules, trusting feeling over instruction, and how many cradles held more than just a child, perhaps a pouch of lavender, a bead of coral, or a simple wish whispered into the blanket. The mother finally sets the book aside and slips under the quilt. The candle has gone out now. The room feels calm again. And you settle back into the shadows, allowing the soft sounds of the night to return to their natural rhythm. You are not a parent, not a nursemaid, not truly a guest, but for one moment in this small bedroom, you feel like a guardian of rest. And somehow, that is sufficient. You have entered a room that seems out of place in this house. It is too spacious, too open. The ceiling is higher than you would expect, and the wallpaper, though faded, was clearly chosen with care. This is not a servant's area. This is not a cramped nursery for children. This is a sick room. And if Victorian rest was difficult in good health, it became something else entirely during illness. The bed here is large, but unadorned, with tall wooden supports and metal wheels. At the end of the bed sits a cushioned chair with a deep impression worn into the seat, evidence of someone who sat there night after night, keeping watch. You move, carefully. The room has a faint smell of disinfectant soap and dried tea flowers. The window coverings are closed but not locked, allowing thin lines of light to streak across the floor. On the small table sits a cracked ceramic water pitcher, a folded cloth, and a small wooden container filled with glass vials. Rest in this room is a required treatment, not a luxury, because for Victorians, recovering from illness meant extended bed rest, sometimes for weeks, even months. Especially for women, whose illnesses, whether physical or emotional, were often treated with long periods of darkness, quiet, and separation. You imagine lying here for days, watching the same patterns on the ceiling, listening to the natural creaking of the house or the distant sound of a train you will never board. The rules for rest in this room are strict. Maintain a reposeful posture, eschew stimulation. Reading materials and visitors are prohibited. Crucially, seek slumber whenever possible. Yet, not all periods of repose were readily attained. This is where the devices come in. Adjacent to the mattress rests a peculiar implement, a sleep cage, a metal armature arching above the occupant, preventing linens from touching tender extremities. You extend your hand and gently brush it. It gives a slight shake. It's rough in construction, but it fulfilled its function. A second apparatus is visible tucked underneath the bed, a bed warmer filled with cooling ash. Not purely for comfort, although it provided some, but to prevent the joints from locking up. Rheumatic fever, consumption, nervous fatigue, all of these afflictions passed through quarters such as this. The environment is dense with quietude, not mere quiet. That distinction holds weight. Quiet can be shattered. Quietude permeates one's very structure. You settle softly into the sentinel's chair. The mattress groans softly beneath the sleeper's mass. Even with minimal movement, their respiration is shallow, steady. You understand that speech is unwarranted. Instead, you examine the walls. A crucifix, a dehydrated cluster of herbs. A string of tiny bells hangs close to the headboard, not for calling assistance, but to indicate consciousness or distress. The chimes are inert. Now a strange realization dawns. The individual in the bed is not aged, they are youthful. And at that instant the insight arrives. This is not hospice care. This is the culture of recovery. The Victorian fixation on managing ailment through inactivity, through strict adherence to schedule, through deliberate deceleration. Some perceived it as tending, others labelled it an enclosure. Regardless, it dictated how the Victorians endured illness, confined in chambers like this one, swathed in wool, muted by kind intentions. And you, this evening, are merely an observer. You remain situated in the sentinel's chair, listening to the subtle murmur of breathing and fabric. The sleeper has not stirred. Their complexion is pale yet serene. For a second, you disregard the era. It could be the present, could be a friend or relative, because something about the gentle attention of this room possesses a heartbreaking permanence. Then your gaze drops. Concealed beneath the ticking is a small folded linen square embroidered with initials and edged in lace. You carefully withdraw it and discover inside a trace of something desiccated and pulverized. Valerian root, most likely. A recognized Victorian tranquilizer. Not as notorious as laudanum or chloral hydrate, but still a fixture in the invalid's room. It was frequently mixed into evening tea or infused into dressings. Rest, after all, was regarded as the supreme curative, surpassed only by faith. Across the space rests a thick, leather-bound volume. Not a Bible, a record of sleep. These were widespread in more affluent homes, especially during extended illnesses. Physicians urged families to document trends. How many hours the patient slept, the frequency of awakenings, whether dreams were calm or distressing. You open the book. Entries are tidy, dated, penned in flowing script. Slept 3 hours, awoke drenched. Dreams of mother's garden cried out at 2 a.m., soothed with peppermint and psalm. You quickly scan the pages and notice another peculiarity. The patient also writes, and in one wavering sentence you read, "The hours are soft and slow. Here, I drift between them." You close the ledger softly. Because that is the truth, isn't it? In Victorian sick rooms, rest was more than simple repose. It was a gauge of improvement, a pause between symptoms, a method to verify convalescence, or an indication of decline. A day with prolonged sleep was cause for rejoicing. A night of agitation could plunge a family into silent dread. You regard the bed once more, the line of bells, the candle stub, the spoon faintly marked with tarnish, all implements from a period when slumber and survival were interwoven, not yet separated by antibiotics or electronic signals. The sleeper shifts. Only slightly, a movement of the hand, but enough. You stand, approach, and smooth the bedding. You consider all the hands that have performed this exact motion, mothers, sisters, nurses, unfamiliar people. And in that simple action, something age-old moves through you. Because Victorian rest was never solely about pillows and sheeting. It was about watching, anticipating, hoping the night would pass tranquilly. And if not, being prepared when it didn't, you withdraw. The room settles back into quietude, And though no one sounds the bell, you understand your vigilance continues. You've observed the beds of the weary and the unwell, but now for the ultimate night of your investigation. You enter a room never intended for rest, yet which ultimately dictated how the entire dwelling took its repose around it, the reception room. By daylight, it is the public facade of the residence, plush seating positioned precisely, a keyboard collecting dust in the corner, a framed likeness of stern-faced forebears staring endlessly into the void. But by night, this space transforms into something else entirely, a temporary refuge for the sleepless. You pull the heavy door shut behind you. It closes with an air of finality. It is quiet now, but you can still perceive the echoes of past conversations that were once murmured here. The dragging sound of slippers after the witching hour, the delicate chime of small cups filled not for callers, but for those who could not sleep, would not sleep, or were not permitted to sleep upstairs. And there beside the fireplace, if you can call glowing residue a fire, is the sofa, too short to fully stretch out, too flimsy for full support, but utilised nonetheless. This is where staff collapsed after too many calls, where guests were courteously asked to make do when their hired transport failed to appear, and sometimes where mourning relatives spent the long hours when slumber was impossible and sorrow had entered. You sink into the uneven upholstery, arms folded. There is a throw tucked in the armrest. It carries the faint scent of camphor and pest repellent. You drape it over your legs, and instantly your body grasps that this is not a location for rest. This is a location for waiting. Because Victorian houses didn't just sleep, they maintained vigilance. Over the sick beds, over the hired help, over propriety itself. And this chamber, this silent, formal, overly constrained chamber, was a buffer. A location where sleep occurred only by chance, and imaginings were shaped by things left unspoken. You reach for the bell cord, pulling it out of habit now, but it is no longer connected to anything. The braid swings once, then stops. A tall case clock chimes in the corner, not loudly, just enough to remind you that the passage of time still holds importance, even if the hour is irrelevant. And on the table adjacent to you rests an artifact you've encountered many times tonight. A ledger, not for symptoms or infant cries or notes about the garden. This one is for dreams. You open it. The entries are bizarre, partly readable, partly expressive. Tumbled into the butter churn. Conversed with grandmother despite her passing. Teeth in the tea service again. You let out a soft laugh, not because it's funny, but because it's authentic. Victorian rest was burdened with directives, yes, but also fantasy. And this, here in the reception room at 2 a.m, is where fantasy collided with reality, where the boundaries softened and the most unusual imaginings always seemed to find expression. You remain seated on the sofa as the last of the coal embers diminish to a dull crimson. The room is cooler now. Somewhere behind the woodwork, the rest of the house slumbers fitfully, anxiously, or not at all. Because Victorian rest, as you have observed, was never genuinely serene. It was governed by tradition, fragmented under surveillance, and sometimes, when fortune failed, entirely unobtainable. You pass your hand over the dream record. Again, tracing the words left by individuals long gone. On the final sheet, inscribed in a looping, anxious hand, is one sentence. Couldn't sleep. Too many eyes in the wallpaper. You look up. True enough. The wall covering in this space is a frenzy of Victorian embellishment. Twisted vines, oversized blossoms, a pattern that seems to ripple when your eyes linger too long. And yes, possibly, just possibly, there are faces in the dim light. You smile wryly. It is absurd. And yet, how many Victorians lay awake in rooms such as this, visualising spectral eyes gazing from paper and plaster? In a society obsessed with plaster casts of the dead, tokens of mourning and séances, it was unsurprising that rest itself became shadowed. The line between imagining and wakefulness, between slumber and the spiritual, was faint in this period, fragile as fine netting and just as easily rent. You draw the moth-scented blanket closer around yourself and look at the hearth one last time. On the mantelpiece above the grate, there is a curious small object, a porcelain sculpture of a sleeping child curled into a crescent moon. Common in the latter part of the 1800s, these figures were placed in sleeping quarters as talismans of rest, intended to foster calm, to safeguard, to remind you. You wonder if it proved effective, if any of this worked, because despite the ledgers, the bells, the soothing liquids, the dream accounts, and the rigorous household mandates, most Victorians still did what you are doing now, waited for rest to arrive. Not compelled, not purchased, not scheduled, just waited. And sometimes that period of waiting extended until sunrise. The clock chimes once more, the coals finally extinguish, and you do not get up from the sofa. You lean back, your eyelids heavy, the velvet pressing against your cheek. For the first time this evening you release the rituals, the rules, the anxieties, and without anticipation you drift. The coals have grown cold, the house is silent. You lie there situated somewhere between the past and the present, between memory and dream, covered not by velvet or wool, but by everything you have observed tonight. The soft shuffle of movement down slender corridors, the light friction of night clothes, the slight sound of bed frames long since taken apart, the quiet urgency in a mother's lullaby, the brief illumination of a candle across an infant's brow, the stiff pages of a dream log filled with confidences never voiced. You've observed the beds of the prominent and the humble, the ceremonies intended to summon repose and the anxieties that held it at bay. You have passed through rooms where rest was a blessing, and others where it was a delicate illusion acquired with calming scents, secured choral or gently spoken prayers whispered into cushions. But now there are no more chimes to be rung, no glowing residue left to stir, no attendants keeping watch. Just you and a silence deeper than any chiming clock. And perhaps, if you listen attentively, you will perceive what they heard too. A respiration not your own. A current of air along the chimney, a recollection stirring in its rest. Allow it to transport you. You do not need to comprehend it completely. You do not need to resolve it. The Victorians did not either. They simply lay down each night in doubt and discomfort, and hoped the night would be lenient, and somehow it was. So proceed, sink further, close your eyes, because the past is at rest now, and soon you will be too.